Conquer yourself and build bulletproof discipline. Introduction. What if everything you believed about discipline was wrong? James stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror of his delivery van, exhausted from another 14-hour shift. His phone buzzed with another overdraft notice, the third this month. The self-help books cluttering his apartment, the abandoned gym membership, and the half-finished online courses all testified to his repeated attempts to change his life. Each time his motivation would surge for a few days before fizzling out, leaving him feeling more defeated than before. "I'm just not disciplined enough," he'd tell himself, echoing a belief that keeps millions trapped in cycles of frustration and self-doubt. Some people are born with it, and some aren't. But James's story, and possibly yours, rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of what discipline really is. To understand why, let's turn to someone who revolutionized not just one field, but several through his mastery of discipline. Arnold Schwarzenegger, a man who transformed himself from a small-town Austrian boy into a 7-time Mr. Olympia, Hollywood superstar, and governor of California, shares a surprising truth about his success. "I was not naturally gifted," he reveals. "But I discovered that when you replace motivation with systems and willpower with strategic habits, everything changes. The same discipline that helped me win Mr. Olympia 7 times transformed every other area of my life." What Schwarzenegger understood, and what modern neuroscience now confirms, is that discipline isn't about having supernatural willpower or forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about building systems that make success inevitable. Think about this for a moment. What if discipline could feel as natural as breathing? What if, instead of fighting against yourself every day, you could build a framework where taking action became your default state? This isn't just positive thinking or motivational fluff. It's based on cutting-edge research in behavioral psychology and neuroscience that reveals how our brains actually create and maintain disciplined behavior. The traditional approach to discipline, relying on motivation and willpower, is like trying to row upstream against a powerful current. You might make progress for a while, but eventually, exhaustion sets in, and you drift back to where you started. But there's another way. Over the next chapters, you'll discover why willpower alone is a failed strategy, and what to use instead. How to build systems that make discipline automatic. The neuroscience of habit formation and how to use it to your advantage. A revolutionary framework for turning any desired behavior into your natural state. This book isn't about adding more pressure to your life or giving you another reason to feel bad about yourself. It's about liberation. It's about understanding the true nature of discipline and using that understanding to create lasting change. By clicking on this audiobook, you've already demonstrated something crucial. The potential for change lies within you. You might not feel it yet, but the very fact that you're reading these words shows you have what psychologists call readiness for change, a critical factor in personal transformation. Remember James? 6 months after discovering the principles you're about to learn, he had launched his own logistics company, lost 30 pounds, and eliminated his debt. Not through superhuman effort or constant struggle, but by implementing the systematic approach to discipline you'll learn today. The journey you're about to embark on isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself. The version of you that acts consistently with your deepest values and aspirations. It's about building a foundation of discipline so solid that success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Are you ready to discover what real discipline looks like? Chapter 1. The Myth of Willpower. Tom's phone screen illuminated the darkness of his bedroom. 5 a.m. His finger hovered over the snooze button, a familiar battle raging in his mind. The running shoes he'd strategically placed by his bed the night before seemed to mock him. This was supposed to be different. Day 1 of his new morning workout routine. the cornerstone of his transformation. "Just 5 more minutes," he mumbled, pressing snooze for what would become the first of 6 times that morning. By 6:30 a.m., Tom sat at his kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, marinating in a toxic blend of guilt and self-loathing. As a successful software developer, he could solve complex coding problems and manage multiple project deadlines, yet something as simple as getting out of bed early felt impossible. "What's wrong with my willpower?" he wondered, echoing a question that haunts millions of people every day. Like Tom, they believe that discipline is simply a matter of having enough willpower, that magical internal force that supposedly separates the achievers from the dreamers. This belief isn't just wrong, it's actively harmful to your growth and success. To understand why, we need to examine one of the most significant misconceptions in personal development. The idea that willpower is like a muscle that can be indefinitely strengthened through exercise. For decades, this willpower as a muscle metaphor dominated both popular psychology and academic thinking. The theory suggested that just as you can build stronger biceps through repeated curls, you could develop unstoppable willpower through continuous challenges to your self-control. This led to the common advice to just push through or stay strong in the face of temptation. However, science has revealed a far different reality. Studies show that willpower is more like a battery that depletes throughout the day, and importantly, this depletion happens whether you're consciously exercising willpower or not. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, and every task you force yourself to complete drains this limited resource. This explains why even the most motivated individuals often find their discipline crumbling by evening, or why making good decisions becomes increasingly difficult as the day progresses. It's not a character flaw. It's your brain's natural response to cognitive depletion. Take the story of Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba and one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. Before building his $500 billion empire, Ma faced rejection from 30 different jobs, including a position at KFC. Traditional wisdom would suggest that Ma succeeded because he had extraordinary willpower to persevere through these rejections. The reality is far more instructive. I learned early that success isn't about forcing yourself forward through sheer will, Ma revealed in a 2018 interview. It's about building the right systems that pull you toward your goals. When I was struggling to find work, I didn't just try harder. I created a morning routine that made taking action inevitable. I set up my environment so that moving forward was easier than staying still. Ma's insight perfectly illustrates what I call the path of least resistance framework, a systematic approach to building discipline that works with your brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. The principle is simple. Instead of relying on willpower to force yourself into action, restructure your environment so that taking the right action becomes the easiest choice available. This brings us to Elena, a working mother of 2 who had tried and failed to establish a consistent exercise routine for years. Like Tom, she would set her alarm with the best intentions, only to find herself making excuses when morning came. But unlike Tom, Elena discovered that the solution wasn't to build more willpower. It was to eliminate the need for willpower entirely. I used to lay out my workout clothes the night before, thinking that would be enough, Elena explains. But I still had to make the decision to get up and put them on. That's where I would fail. Her breakthrough came when she completely redesigned her morning routine using the path of least resistance framework. Instead of relying on willpower to make good decisions in the morning, Elena slept in her workout clothes, preset her coffee maker to start brewing 5 minutes before her alarm, arranged to meet a friend at the gym at a specific time, placed her phone across the room, requiring her to physically get up to turn off the alarm, prepaid for her gym sessions monthly, making each missed workout a financial loss. The amazing thing was how quickly it stopped feeling like a struggle, Elena says. When working out became the path of least resistance, my mind stopped fighting it. Now it feels stranger to skip a workout than to do one. Elena's experience demonstrates a crucial truth. Sustainable discipline isn't about having more willpower than others. It's about creating systems that make good decisions automatic. This isn't just theory. It's supported by decades of research in behavioral psychology and habit formation. The key insight here is that your brain is naturally wired to conserve energy by taking the path of least resistance. Instead of fighting this tendency, you can harness it by making your desired behaviors the easiest choice available. This is how real, lasting discipline is built, not through heroic feats of willpower, but through intelligent system design. Think about your own life for a moment. Where are you currently relying on willpower alone to maintain discipline? Perhaps, like Tom, you're trying to force yourself into a morning routine. Or maybe you're struggling to stick to a diet, stay focused at work, or maintain a consistent practice in some area of your life. Now imagine if you could restructure these challenges so that taking the right action required less willpower than taking the wrong one. This isn't just possible, it's the foundation of sustainable discipline, and in the coming chapters, you'll learn exactly how to implement this approach in every area of your life. But first, take a moment to identify 3 areas where you're currently relying on willpower alone. Write them down, being as specific as possible. These are the battlegrounds where we'll begin transforming struggle into strategy, replacing the myth of willpower with the science of systems. Remember, the goal isn't to become someone with superhuman willpower. It's to create an environment where you don't need willpower to succeed. As you'll discover, true discipline isn't about forcing yourself to do hard things. It's about making the right things easy. Chapter 2. Your Brain on Discipline. David stared at his open medical textbook, the words blurring before his eyes. His board exams were just weeks away, yet here he was, mindlessly scrolling through his phone instead of studying. The weight of his future pressed down on his shoulders. He knew exactly what was at stake, understood precisely why this mattered, could even visualize the devastating consequences of failure. Yet somehow that knowledge wasn't enough to make him take action. What's wrong with me? He wondered, a question that echoed through the minds of countless others facing similar struggles. I know what I need to do. I want to do it. So why can't I just make myself do it? David's struggle illuminates one of the most fascinating paradoxes of human behavior, the gap between knowing and doing. To understand why this gap exists, and more importantly, how to bridge it, we need to explore the intricate machinery of your brain and how it processes discipline. Your brain is essentially running on hardware that evolved for a very different world than the one you inhabit today. This ancient operating system was designed for immediate survival in an environment where calories were scarce and dangers were immediate. It wasn't built for long-term planning, delayed gratification, or the kind of sustained, focused effort that modern success requires. This explains why you can fully understand the importance of studying, exercising, or working on your business, yet still find yourself pulled toward immediate gratifications like social media, junk food, or Netflix. Your brain's reward circuits are literally wired to prioritize immediate, certain pleasures over delayed, uncertain benefits, even when you consciously know better. But here's the exciting part. While you can't change your brain's basic operating system, you can absolutely reprogram how it responds to different stimuli. This is where the science of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to form new neural pathways, becomes your greatest ally in building discipline. Think of the remarkable story of Will Smith, who transformed himself from a struggling rapper in West Philadelphia to one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. What's particularly interesting about Smith's journey isn't just his success, but the systematic way he approached rewiring his brain for discipline. I spent years fighting against my brain's natural tendencies, Smith revealed in a 2019 interview. I'd try to force myself to memorize scripts, to wake up early, to put in extra hours at the gym. It was exhausting and often ineffective. Then I learned about how the brain actually forms habits, and everything changed. Once I understood that my brain would automatically resist anything unfamiliar, I stopped fighting it and started training it instead. Smith's approach, which he calls systematic habit stacking, aligns perfectly with neuroscientific research on habit formation. He discovered that by linking new behaviors to existing habits and creating immediate reward loops, he could literally rewire his brain's response to disciplined action. I started treating my brain like a dog I was training, Smith explains. Instead of expecting it to understand long-term consequences, I gave it immediate rewards for small wins. Every time I finished memorizing a page of script, I'd give myself a small piece of chocolate. Sounds simple, right? But that immediate reward created a dopamine response that made my brain start craving the work itself. This insight leads us to what I call the neural rewiring protocol, a systematic approach to programming your brain for automatic disciplined action. The protocol works by leveraging your brain's natural reward circuits to create positive associations with productive behaviors. The implications of this understanding are profound. It means that discipline isn't about having some innate quality that others lack. It's about systematically training your brain to crave the very actions that lead to success. Just as Pavlov's dogs learn to salivate at the sound of a bell, your brain can be conditioned to anticipate pleasure from productive behaviors. Now it's time to put this knowledge into action. Over the next 3 days, you're going to conduct a personal experiment in neural rewiring. Here's your challenge. Choose one specific behavior you want to make automatic. Start small. Think 10 to 15 minutes. Design a clear, immediate reward that you'll give yourself only after completing the behavior. Set up your environment to minimize resistance. Make the desired action obvious and easy. Stack the new behavior onto an existing habit. Document your brain's response each day, noting your level of resistance before starting, any changes in how you feel during the activity, your emotional state immediately after completing the task and receiving your reward. This experiment isn't just about building one habit. It's about understanding how your unique brain responds to different cues and rewards. The insights you gain will become the foundation for rewiring larger, more challenging behaviors in the future. Remember, your brain is the most sophisticated learning machine ever created. It's not a matter of forcing it into submission. It's about understanding its programming language and using that knowledge to create lasting change. Chapter 3. The High Price of Good Intentions. Alex sat at his desk, surrounded by a collection of journals spanning 5 years. Each one was filled with meticulously written goals, detailed action plans, and passionate declarations of change. Opening the oldest journal, he found a familiar entry. "This year, I'll finally launch my consulting business." The same goal appeared in every subsequent journal, each time written with renewed enthusiasm, but yielding the same result: nothing. His fingers traced over the carefully crafted vision boards, the detailed 5-year plans, and the countless morning affirmations. Each page represented hours spent planning, dreaming, and intending. Yet here he was, still in the same corporate job he'd promised himself he'd leave years ago. What Alex didn't realize was that each well-intentioned plan was actually moving him further from his goals, not closer to them. Every time he wrote down his intentions, his brain experienced a small sense of accomplishment, just enough to reduce the urgency to take actual action. This phenomenon, known as goal satisfaction by proxy, explains why the simple act of planning can become a substitute for doing. The science behind this is fascinating. When you write down a goal or share your intentions, your brain releases dopamine, the same reward chemical it would release upon actually achieving the goal. This premature reward signal can trick your brain into feeling a sense of progress without having made any real change. Think about the last time you told someone about a new goal, perhaps starting a workout routine or learning a new skill. Did you notice how good it felt just to share your intention? That feeling, while pleasant, can be dangerous. It can create what psychologists call the intention-behavior gap, where the very act of declaring your intentions reduces your likelihood of following through. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive success principles, perfectly illustrated by Elon Musk's approach to productivity. In a 2021 interview about Tesla's rapid growth, Musk shared something that shocked many aspiring entrepreneurs. "I never waste time setting intentions. I focus entirely on building systems that force execution." When pressed for details, Musk explained, "Good intentions are like using your emergency brake while trying to drive. They give you the illusion of safety but actually prevent forward momentum. At Tesla, we never start with intentions. We start with immediate measurable actions. Want to improve production? Don't write a plan about it. Change the factory layout today. Want to innovate? Don't schedule a future brainstorming session. Lock yourself in a room right now and don't leave until you've prototyped something new." This approach might seem radical, but it's supported by decades of behavioral research. Studies show that people who immediately take small actions toward their goals are significantly more likely to succeed than those who spend time planning and setting intentions. The difference in success rates isn't small. It's often as high as 300%. This leads us to what I call the implementation immediacy method, a systematic approach to transforming vague intentions into concrete, unavoidable actions. The method works by creating what psychologists call implementation intentions, specific if-then plans that bypass the need for motivation or willpower. The key components are trigger identification, precisely defining the moment when action must occur. Action specificity, breaking down intended behavior into its smallest executable components. Consequence structure, creating immediate, not future, stakes for action or inaction. Let's see how this method transformed one person's long-held dream into reality through the story of Sophia, a high school English teacher who had intended to write a novel for over a decade. "I had the most detailed writing plans you could imagine," Sophia recalls. "I knew my characters, my plot, even the font I wanted to use for the title page. But somehow, years kept passing, and I hadn't written a single chapter." Sophia's breakthrough came when she discovered the implementation immediacy method. Instead of making more plans or setting more intentions, she created an immediate action system. Trigger identification. She identified specific triggers that would automatically initiate writing sessions. Example: when I put my coffee cup in the sink each morning, trigger: I will immediately sit at my designated writing spot. Action: she removed all planning tools and replaced them with action triggers. Action specificity: rather than write today, she specified exact scenes to write. Each writing session began with the last sentence from the previous session. She eliminated all prep work, research, and planning during writing time. Consequence structure. She prepaid her friend $50 for each scheduled writing session. She would only get the money back if she produced 500 words. The money would be donated to a cause she opposed if she failed to write. The transformation was immediate, Sophia shares. Suddenly, writing wasn't something I intended to do someday. It was something happening right now, with real consequences and rewards. Within 6 months, Sophia had completed her first draft. The funny thing is, once I stopped intending and started doing, I realized how much time I'd wasted on planning. The actual writing took far less time than all those years of making plans and setting intentions. The price of good intentions goes beyond just wasted time. Every unfulfilled intention creates a small crack in your self-trust, gradually eroding your belief in your ability to change. This accumulating psychological debt can be more costly than any financial investment you might make in pursuing your goals. To understand this cost in your own life, let's do a simple calculation. Think of a goal you've been intending to achieve. Calculate the time spent planning, writing about, or discussing this goal. Estimate the potential benefits you've missed by not taking action. Add the psychological cost of diminished self-trust. Factor in the opportunity cost of other goals you could have pursued. For most people, this calculation reveals a staggering cost. One study found that the average person spends 17.5 hours per month planning changes they never implement. Over a lifetime, this amounts to years of lost productivity and missed opportunities. But there's an even deeper cost to good intentions. They create what psychologists call moral licensing. When you set an intention to improve, your brain gives you partial credit for the improvement before you've made any real change. This false sense of progress can actually increase the likelihood of self-sabotaging behavior. This explains why people who announce their intention to diet often end up eating more in the short term, or why declaring your intention to save money can lead to increased spending. The mere act of setting the intention creates a sense of moral credit that your brain uses to justify counterproductive actions. The solution isn't to abandon planning entirely, but to create systems that make immediate action unavoidable. This means replacing "I intend to exercise" with "I'm putting on my running shoes right now." I plan to start saving with "I'm automating a transfer to savings today." I want to learn Spanish with "I'm calling a tutor in the next 5 minutes." Think of intentions like a map. Having a map is useful, but simply studying it won't get you to your destination. At some point, you have to start walking. The implementation immediacy method ensures you spend less time studying the map and more time moving forward. Chapter 4. Breaking the Motivation Trap. Kevin stared at his laptop screen, the business plan document still blank after 6 months. As a successful personal trainer, he knew exactly how to help clients transform their bodies. Yet when it came to growing his own business, he remained stuck in an endless cycle of waiting for the right moment to begin. "I'll start when I feel more inspired," he told himself, closing the laptop for the 100th time. "I need to be in the right headspace to do this properly." Like many of us, Kevin had fallen into what I call the motivation trap, the belief that we need to feel motivated before taking action. This seemingly logical approach actually creates a destructive cycle. We wait for motivation, which rarely comes without action, leading to inaction, which further decreases motivation. The irony wasn't lost on Kevin. Every day, he told his clients that they couldn't wait until they felt like working out. Yet here he was, applying the exact opposite principle to his own goals. This brings us to a fundamental truth about human behavior. Motivation doesn't create action. Action creates motivation. This isn't just motivational speak. It's backed by compelling neuroscience. When we take action, regardless of how we feel, our brains release small amounts of dopamine. This neurochemical response actually generates the feeling we call motivation, creating an upward spiral of continued action. Think about the last time you had to force yourself to exercise. The hardest part wasn't the workout itself, it was getting started. But once you began moving, motivation typically followed. This isn't coincidence, it's biology. Let me tell you about an interesting study. Participants were divided into 2 groups. One waited to exercise until they felt motivated, while the other followed a strict schedule regardless of their emotional state. After 3 months, the scheduled group not only exercised 300% more consistently, but also reported higher overall motivation levels. When asked to elaborate on this principle, the researchers shared a powerful insight from SEAL training. On our worst days, when the water was cold, the mud was thick, and every muscle screamed for rest, we learned something crucial. Motivation is a luxury, but action is non-negotiable. The simple act of making your bed perfectly every morning might seem trivial, but it creates a small win that spawns bigger victories. We never asked ourselves if we felt motivated. We simply acted, and the motivation followed. This principle extends far beyond military training. Do you see how some of the world's most prolific creators maintain their output? Stephen King writes every day from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., regardless of inspiration. This brings us to your 7-day challenge. For the next week, you're going to choose one tiny action that takes less than 2 minutes to complete, can be done at the same time every day, moves you toward an important goal, requires zero motivation to accomplish. Your task is to perform this action every day, regardless of how you feel, and document 3 things. The level of motivation you felt before the action, 1 to 10. The level of motivation you felt after the action, 1 to 10. Any insights or observations about the process? This challenge isn't about creating a major transformation in 7 days. It's about proving to yourself that action precedes motivation, not the other way around. By the end of the week, you'll have concrete evidence that waiting for motivation is not only unnecessary, but counterproductive. Remember, the size of the action doesn't matter nearly as much as the consistency of its execution. Whether you're writing 1 sentence, doing 1 push-up, or sending 1 email, you're rewiring your brain to understand that action comes first. Motivation follows. Chapter 5. Identity Beats Willpower. Daniel sat in his perfectly organized studio surrounded by untouched canvases and meticulously arranged art supplies. His time-blocking schedule hung on the wall, color-coded and detailed down to 15-minute intervals. The productivity apps on his phone were configured with precision. His workspace was a testament to careful planning and strategic thinking. Yet he hadn't created a single piece of art in 3 months. "I've tried everything," he confided to his friend over coffee. "I've read the productivity books, downloaded the habit tracking apps, even hired a coach. I know exactly what to do and when to do it, but something keeps holding me back." Daniel's struggle illustrates a crucial truth about human behavior. The most sophisticated strategies and systems will fail if they conflict with our core identity. While Daniel had mastered the tactical aspects of creating a productive routine, he still saw himself as someone trying to be an artist rather than an artist. This subtle distinction made all the difference. Think about your own experience with change. How many times have you implemented the perfect plan, only to find yourself unconsciously sabotaging it? The reason isn't a lack of knowledge or tools. It's that your actions are fighting against your self-image. This brings us to a fundamental principle of lasting transformation. Identity beats willpower every time. When your actions align with your self-image, they become automatic. When they don't, every step feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Research from the University of California's Behavior Design Lab demonstrates this powerfully. In a study of successful long-term behavior change, the strongest predictor of success wasn't the participants' strategies or willpower. It was whether they had adopted a new identity consistent with their desired behavior. Someone who sees themselves as health-conscious doesn't need willpower to choose a salad over fast food. It's simply what a health-conscious person does. A disciplined entrepreneur doesn't need motivation to work on their business. It's fundamental to who they are. This identity-first approach to change is perfectly exemplified by David Goggins' remarkable transformation. Before becoming an ultra-athlete and Navy SEAL, Goggins was an overweight pest exterminator struggling with depression. His transformation began not with a workout plan, but with a fundamental shift in how he saw himself. "I had all the usual tools, the gym membership, the diet plan, the schedule," Goggins revealed in a candid interview. "But nothing stuck until I addressed the real issue, who I believed I was. The biggest battle isn't with the habits themselves, it's with who you believe you are. Once I stopped seeing myself as someone who needed motivation and started seeing myself as someone who just does the work, everything changed." Goggins' insight leads us to what I call the Identity Evolution Protocol, a systematic approach to rewriting your self-image through strategic action. The protocol works in 3 phases: Identity archaeology, understanding your current self-image and its origins. Identity architecture, designing your new identity with precision. Identity integration, systematically embodying your new self-image through small, strategic actions. The science behind this approach is fascinating. Neuroplasticity research shows that our brains physically restructure themselves based on our self-concept. When we consciously adopt a new identity and act in alignment with it, we literally rewire our neural pathways to support this new self-image. This explains why traditional approaches to habit change often fail. When we focus solely on changing behaviors while maintaining an opposing self-image, we create internal conflict. It's like trying to drive with one foot on the gas and one on the brake. See how this plays out in various contexts. A person who sees themselves as bad with money will unconsciously sabotage even the best budgeting system. Someone who identifies as not a morning person will struggle with any morning routine, no matter how well designed. An individual who believes they're not creative will find reasons not to pursue creative projects, regardless of their actual potential. This brings us to the crucial question: how do you begin your identity transformation? The answer lies in starting with actions so small they don't trigger identity-based resistance. For instance, if you want to develop the identity of a writer, don't try to write for hours. Start by writing one sentence each morning. Focus on the fact that writers write, and you're writing. Gradually increase your output as your new identity solidifies. The key is to create evidence for your new identity through consistent, manageable actions. Each small success becomes proof that reinforces who you're becoming. This brings us to today's exercise, the future self-letter. Take out your journal and write a letter from your future self, dated 1 year from today. But here's the crucial difference. Instead of focusing on what you've accomplished, focus on who you've become. Rather than writing, "I finished my novel," or "I lost 30 pounds," write about the kind of person you are. For example, "I am someone who naturally makes time for creative work. I am the kind of person who craves healthy food." Chapter 6. The Power of Micro-Commitments. Andre stared at his new productivity system, a complex matrix of time blocks, habit trackers, and goal-setting frameworks spread across 3 different apps and 2 physical planners. It was a masterpiece of planning, comprehensive enough to transform him into a high-performing entrepreneur overnight. There was just one problem. By day 3, he'd already fallen hopelessly behind. "I don't understand," he confided during a networking event. "I committed to waking up at 5 a.m., meditating for an hour, working out, reading 50 pages, and completing my most important tasks before noon. The system is perfect. I just can't seem to follow through." Andre's story might make you smile in recognition. How many times have you designed an ambitious new system, convinced that this time would be different? How many times have you fallen short, not because your intentions weren't good, but because you tried to change everything at once? This brings us to a counterintuitive truth about lasting change. The smaller your initial commitment, the larger your eventual success. When it comes to building discipline, thinking big but starting microscopically small is the surest path to transformation. Think about trying to push a heavy boulder. Start trying to move it with all your might, and you'll likely strain yourself without making progress. But give it a tiny nudge, then another and another. Suddenly, you've created momentum that makes larger movement possible. This principle of micro-commitments transformed Serena Williams' early career development in ways few people realize. While many see her 23 Grand Slam singles titles and assume she possessed supernatural discipline from the start, the reality tells a different story. "People see the championships," Williams shared in a revealing interview, "but they don't see how I built my discipline through tiny daily commitments. Success isn't about occasional heroic efforts. It's about small, consistent actions compounded over time." Williams didn't start with marathon training sessions. Instead, she began with what she calls minimal, meaningful movements. Commitments so small they seemed almost trivial. She would promise herself to hit just 10 serves before breakfast, to do 5 minutes of footwork drills, to watch match footage for 3 minutes. These tiny commitments did two crucial things, she explains. First, they were impossible to fail at. Who doesn't have time for 3 minutes? Second, they always led to more. Once I was on the court hitting those 10 serves, I naturally wanted to continue. But the key was never pressuring myself to do more. The micro-commitment was all I promised myself. Olympic athletes begin with one extra rep. Successful entrepreneurs start with one daily sales call. Best-selling authors commit to one paragraph. The power of micro-commitments lies in their ability to bypass our brain's natural resistance to change. When a commitment feels tiny, we don't trigger our threat response. We don't need willpower to begin. We build confidence through consistent wins. We create momentum that naturally scales. Notice how this applies to any area where you're seeking to build discipline. Instead of trying to meditate for an hour, commit to one conscious breath. Rather than planning to exercise for an hour, commit to putting on your running shoes and stepping outside. Don't try to overhaul your diet overnight. Commit to adding one vegetable to one meal. Chapter 7. Environment, your secret weapon. Think about the last time you walked into a library. Without conscious effort, you probably lowered your voice and moved more carefully. The environment itself triggered these behaviors. Now imagine trying to maintain that same library-appropriate behavior at a rock concert. You'd be fighting against the environment's natural pull, and eventually the environment would win. This brings us to a revolutionary truth about discipline. Your environment is either working for you or against you. There is no neutral ground. Mark Zuckerberg understood this principle early in his career, leading to his famous decision to wear the same style of clothes every day. I wear the same clothes every day not because I'm eccentric, he explained in a revealing interview, but because I understand that your environment either multiplies or divides your discipline. Every decision you eliminate through environmental design frees up energy for what truly matters. This wasn't just about simplifying his wardrobe. Zuckerberg had discovered what behavioral scientists now call decision minimization, the practice of engineering your environment to reduce cognitive load and automate disciplined choices. People think it's about the clothes, he continued, but it's really about understanding how your brain interacts with your environment. Every morning you spend deciding what to wear is mental energy you can't spend on more important decisions. Every time you have to consciously resist a distraction, you're burning cognitive resources that could be better used elsewhere. This brings us to what I call the environmental success architecture, a systematic approach to designing spaces that naturally trigger disciplined behavior. This isn't about willpower or motivation. It's about creating an environment that makes discipline your default state. The system works on 3 levels. Physical architecture, how you arrange your space to support or hinder specific behaviors. Digital architecture, how you structure your devices and online environment. Social architecture, how you design your interactions and relationships. Let's see how Priya Kumar, a marketing executive, used this system to transform her health journey. Like many, Priya had tried countless diets and exercise programs, always starting with enthusiasm, but eventually falling back into old patterns. I kept blaming myself for lacking discipline, Priya recalls. I had all these rules: no snacking after 8 p.m., prep healthy meals on Sundays, exercise every morning. But somehow, I'd always end up on the couch with takeout, wondering what was wrong with me. Then Priya discovered environmental design. Instead of focusing on building more willpower, she began systematically redesigning her environment to make healthy choices the path of least resistance. Her environmental success architecture looked like this. Physical architecture removed all chairs from her home office, replacing them with a standing desk. rearranged kitchen cabinets so healthy foods were at eye level, created a workout pathway where her exercise mat and weights were the first things she saw in the morning, changed her commute route to avoid passing her trigger restaurants. Digital architecture, removed food delivery apps from her phone, set up automatic grocery deliveries for healthy staples, programmed her TV to shut off automatically at 9 p.m., created device-free zones in her kitchen and bedroom. Social architecture, joined a morning walking group in her neighborhood, scheduled weekly meal prep sessions with a friend, shared her environmental changes on social media for accountability, created a health council of 3 friends who were working towards similar goals. The difference was immediate and almost effortless, Priya explains. Instead of fighting against my environment, it was suddenly working for me. When healthy snacks were the first things I saw in my kitchen, I naturally reached for them. When my workout gear was laid out in my path to the bathroom, morning exercise became automatic. The results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, Priya had lost 30 pounds and maintained consistent healthy habits, not through increased willpower, but through strategic environmental design. Chapter 8. The Value Action Bridge. Nathan slumped in his ergonomic chair at 2 a.m., empty energy drink cans scattered across his desk like fallen soldiers. His smartwatch buzzed another warning about his elevated heart rate, but his fingers kept dancing across the keyboard. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, building a health tracking app meant to help people live better lives, while systematically destroying his own health in the process. "Just one more commit," he muttered, the same phrase he'd used 3 hours ago when he'd promised himself he'd get to bed early. The fitness books on his shelf seemed to mock him, their spines collecting dust while he chose, night after night, to prioritize code over sleep. This painful gap between what we value and what we actually do isn't just Nathan's struggle. It's a universal human experience that lies at the heart of the discipline challenge. You might deeply value health while reaching for another slice of pizza, or cherish creativity while watching your 4th hour of Netflix. The distance between these values and actions creates a particular kind of psychological pain, one that can't be solved by simply trying harder or setting better goals. Michelle Obama's journey provides a powerful illustration of this principle. Before becoming First Lady, she struggled with the same value-action gap many of us face. "I had all these beautiful values written in my journal," she shared during a candid interview. Family, health, community service, they were all there on paper. But day after day, I found myself making choices that didn't align with these values. I discovered that discipline isn't about forcing yourself to live up to your values. It's about building bridges that make crossing from intention to action effortless. She went on to explain how this realization transformed her approach to discipline. Instead of beating myself up about the gap between my values and actions, I started building what I call value bridges, specific systems that made living my values the default option rather than something I had to constantly choose. This brings us to the practical application of a practice called the Value Action Integration Protocol in your life. The process begins with what I call a value action audit, a systematic assessment of the gaps between what you say matters most and how you actually spend your time and energy. The audit asks 3 essential questions. What are your stated core values? What does your calendar say you actually value? Where are the biggest gaps between these 2 realities? Chapter 9. The 66-Day Discipline Blueprint. Lisa stared at her habit tracker app, a digital graveyard of abandoned commitments. Morning meditation, 12 days. Daily writing, 18 days. Gym routine, 15 days. Each streak represented another burst of enthusiasm that fizzled out just as it was beginning to feel sustainable. As she scrolled through the data, a pattern emerged. She consistently abandoned her habits between the 2 and 3 week mark, right when conventional wisdom said they should be becoming automatic. Maybe I'm just not cut out for lasting change, she thought, echoing a sentiment shared by countless others who've struggled to make new habits stick. Like many high achievers, Lisa excelled at starting strong, but struggled with the long game of habit formation. Her story illuminates a crucial misconception about how habits really form, one that keeps millions trapped in the cycle of start, stop, restart. For decades, the self-help world has perpetuated the myth that it takes 21 days to form a new habit. This oversimplified timeline, derived from a misinterpretation of plastic surgeon Maxwell Maltz's observations in the 1960s, has set unrealistic expectations and led countless people to abandon their habits just before the real transformation begins. In a groundbreaking study tracking real-world habit formation, they discovered something remarkable. The average time for a new behavior to become automatic was not 21 days, but 66 days. More importantly, the research revealed distinct phases in the habit formation process that explain why so many people give up around the 3-week mark. Warren Buffett, known for his methodical approach to both investing and personal development, offers a powerful perspective on this discovery. Everyone wants quick results, he shared during a shareholders meeting, but true behavioral change is like compound interest. The real magic happens when you stick with small, consistent actions beyond the excitement phase. Most people fail not because they choose the wrong actions, but because they don't understand the timeline of transformation. Buffett's own habit formation strategy reflects this long-term thinking. He famously reads for at least 6 hours every day, a habit that didn't develop overnight but was built through consistent practice beyond the initial excitement phase. The first few weeks of any new habit are like the early years of compound interest, he explains. The real results aren't visible yet, but if you understand the timeline, you can trust the process. This brings us to what I call the 66-day implementation framework, a comprehensive system for installing new habits with scientific precision. Unlike traditional habit formation approaches that rely on motivation and willpower, this framework is built around the natural phases of behavioral change revealed by Dr. Lally's research. The framework breaks down the 66-day journey into 4 distinct phases. The honeymoon phase, days 1-14. During this initial period, enthusiasm and novelty fuel your actions. Everything feels possible, and the new behavior is exciting. The key during this phase isn't to ride the wave of motivation, but to use it strategically to set up systems that will carry you through tougher phases ahead. The reality phase, days 15-28. This is where most people quit. The novelty has worn off, results aren't yet visible, and the brain begins to resist the energy cost of new behaviors. Understanding that this resistance is normal and temporary is crucial for pushing through to the next phase, the transformation phase, days 29-50. During this period, the new behavior starts requiring less conscious effort. Small wins become noticeable, and the cost of action begins to decrease. This is where the first signs of automaticity emerge. The automation phase, days 51-66. The final phase is where the new behavior becomes increasingly automatic. The neural pathways are well established, and maintaining the habit requires minimal conscious effort. Trevor Matthews, a freelance copywriter from Portland, used this framework to transform from a chronic procrastinator into a highly productive writer. His story illustrates how understanding these phases changes everything about habit formation. I used to beat myself up for not being able to stick to a writing schedule, Trevor shares. I'd start strong, writing every morning for a week or two, then gradually slip back into procrastination. I blamed myself for lacking discipline, not realizing I was just misunderstanding the timeline of habit formation. When Trevor discovered the 66-day implementation framework, everything changed. Instead of expecting immediate transformation, he approached his writing habit as a 66-day experiment. He set up his environment for success during the honeymoon phase, creating a dedicated writing space and removing digital distractions. More importantly, he prepared for the reality phase, knowing in advance that his motivation would dip around day 15. Understanding that the struggle was normal and temporary changed everything, he explains. Instead of interpreting resistance as failure, I saw it as a sign I was right on schedule. Trevor used specific strategies for each phase. During the honeymoon phase, he focused on making his writing routine as simple and friction-free as possible. He set out his writing materials the night before and committed to just 300 words daily, an amount small enough to be sustainable but substantial enough to matter. When the reality phase hit, he had support systems ready. He joined a writer's accountability group and set up consequences for missing sessions. He also kept a resistance journal to document his brain's attempts to avoid writing, which helped him maintain perspective during difficult days. In the transformation phase, he began noticing subtle shifts. The resistance to starting became less intense, and his writing flow improved. He celebrated these small wins while maintaining his support systems. By the automation phase, writing had become as natural as brushing his teeth. The most surprising thing, Trevor notes, was how the struggle just melted away. I didn't have to force myself anymore. Writing had become my default state. Today, Trevor consistently produces high-quality content for major publications, and his income has tripled since implementing this framework. The 66-day implementation framework didn't just change my writing habit, he reflects. It changed my entire relationship with habit formation. I now understand that the timeline is the key. If you trust the process and prepare for each phase, transformation is inevitable. This brings us to your 66-day challenge. Rather than taking on this journey alone, you'll be joining or creating an accountability group focused on installing one specific habit over the next 66 days. This could be a local group that meets weekly, an online community, or even a small group of friends committed to the same timeline. The challenge has 3 simple components. First, choose one specific habit you'll commit to for the full 66 days. Make it small enough to be sustainable, but significant enough to impact your life. Remember, we're not aiming for heroic actions. We're building automatic behaviors. Second, establish your tracking system. This could be a simple calendar, a habit tracking app, or a daily journal. The key is consistency in recording your progress. Third, create or join your accountability group. Share your chosen habit and tracking method with the group, and establish regular check-in times throughout the 66-day journey. The power of this challenge lies in its simplicity and social support. By combining scientific understanding of habit formation with group accountability, you'll be set up for success through all 4 phases of the journey.
Chapter 10. Designing Your Success. Triggers.
Miguel sat at his desk surrounded by the digital ruins of failed productivity solutions. 3 different website blockers, a Pomodoro timer app, and even a $300 distraction-free device lay abandoned in his quest to stay focused. Yet here he was again, an hour deep into a social media spiral, wondering how he'd wandered so far from his design deadlines. His screen displayed a client project due tomorrow, but his attention kept drifting to the steady stream of notifications lighting up his phone. "I don't get it," he muttered, closing yet another social media tab. "I have every tool imaginable. Why can't I just focus?" Like many professionals in our hyper-connected world, Miguel was fighting an exhausting daily battle against distractions. But he was making a crucial mistake, one that keeps countless high achievers trapped in the cycle of productivity struggles. He was trying to eliminate temptations rather than understanding and redesigning the triggers that launched him into distraction in the first place. What Miguel didn't realize was that human behavior rarely exists in isolation. Every action, whether productive or destructive, is initiated by a trigger, a cue in our environment or internal state that automatically launches a behavioral sequence. These triggers are so deeply embedded in our daily routines that we often fail to notice their powerful influence on our actions. This insight brings us to Olympic champion Michael Phelps, whose 23 gold medals weren't just the result of physical prowess, but of masterful trigger design. People focus on the swim, Phelps shared during a performance psychology symposium, but my success was built in the hours before I touched the water. By designing precise triggers, I automated excellence long before the competition began. Phelps's famous pre-race routine wasn't just a superstitious ritual, it was a carefully engineered sequence of triggers that automatically launched him into a peak performance state. From the moment he arrived at the pool, every action served as a trigger for the next, creating a seamless chain of behaviors that culminated in world record performances. I didn't have to think about getting into the zone, Phelps explains. The triggers did the work for me. Each step, from putting on my headphones to doing those arm swings everyone knows, was a precise cue that automatically launched the next action. By the time I reached the starting block, excellence wasn't a choice I had to make. It was my only option. This brings us to what I call the strategic trigger design method, a systematic approach to engineering your environment and routines for automatic success. Unlike traditional productivity strategies that focus on blocking or eliminating distractions, this method works by identifying and redesigning the triggers that initiate both productive and unproductive behaviors. The method consists of 3 key phases: trigger mapping, trigger analysis, and trigger redesign. In the mapping phase, you'll document every cue that launches your current behaviors, both positive and negative. This includes environmental triggers, like your phone lighting up, temporal triggers, specific times of day, emotional triggers, stress or boredom, and social triggers, presence or absence of certain people. The analysis phase involves examining the strength and automaticity of each trigger behavior connection. Some triggers have become so strongly wired to specific behaviors that they launch actions almost instantaneously, like checking your phone the moment you feel slightly bored or anxious. The redesign phase is where transformation begins. Instead of trying to eliminate negative triggers, which often creates resistance and backlash, you'll learn to overlay new positive triggers that launch productive behaviors before the negative ones can take hold. This brings us to your 3-day trigger mapping challenge. For the next 3 days, you'll become a behavioral detective, documenting every trigger that launches both productive and unproductive behaviors in your life. This isn't about judgment or change yet. It's purely about awareness and documentation. Carry a small notebook or use your phone's Notes app to record what launches you into distraction. What environmental cues precede your most focused states? Which locations or situations consistently trigger certain behaviors? What emotional states tend to initiate specific actions? After 3 days of mapping, you'll choose 3 specific behaviors you want to change and design new environmental triggers to support these changes. Remember, we're not trying to eliminate negative triggers yet. We're simply overlaying more compelling positive ones. Chapter 11. Mastering Decision Points. The human brain makes an estimated 35,000 decisions each day. While this number might seem surprising, consider how many choices you've already made today. What to wear, when to wake up, what to eat, which emails to open first, which tasks to prioritize. Each of these decisions, no matter how small, depletes a finite cognitive resource that neuroscientists call decision-making energy. Our ability to make high-quality decisions doesn't decline in a linear fashion throughout the day. Instead, it follows a predictable pattern of sharp drops after periods of intense decision-making. This explains why judges are significantly more likely to grant parole in the morning or right after their lunch break, and why even experienced executives make poorer choices late in the day. This brings us to Jeff Bezos, who built Amazon into one of the world's most valuable companies by understanding and optimizing his decision points. I make all my high-stakes decisions before 10:30 a.m., Bezos revealed during a leadership summit. Understanding your decision points is more important than understanding the decisions themselves. When people ask about Amazon's success, they want to know about our biggest decisions. But the real secret is knowing when to make those decisions. Bezos structured his entire schedule around this insight. He starts his mornings with what he calls high IQ meetings, sessions requiring complex analysis and important decisions. By the afternoon, he shifts to more routine matters and relationship-building activities that don't demand the same level of cognitive precision. Most people think success comes from making good decisions, Bezos explains. But that's only half the equation. The other half is making those decisions at the right time, when your decision-making energy is at its peak. Understanding this changed everything for me and for Amazon. Consider the story of Amara, a fitness coach who transformed her own health journey through decision point optimization. Like many people, Amara used to rely on in-the-moment motivation to make healthy choices throughout the day. She'd wake up determined to eat well and exercise, but found her resolve crumbling as decision fatigue set in. I was approaching it all wrong, Amara recalls. I thought discipline meant having the willpower to make healthy choices all day long. But I was asking myself to make the hardest decisions when my decision-making energy was at its lowest. But then something changed. I started laying out my entire fitness day each morning at 6 a.m., when my mind was fresh and my decision-making energy was at its peak, she explains. I'd pack my lunch, set out my workout clothes, and write down my exact exercise plan. By the time those challenging moments arrived, the decisions were already made. All I had to do was follow through on choices I'd made when I was in a stronger state of mind. The results were transformative. Not only did Amara's consistency with exercise and nutrition improve dramatically, but she also found herself with more mental energy for other important decisions throughout the day. By eliminating the need to make fitness decisions in the moment, I freed up cognitive resources for other areas of my life. My work improved, my relationships got better, and ironically, my discipline got stronger because I wasn't depleting it on recurring decisions. This brings us to your reflective journaling exercise. For the next 5 days, you'll identify and optimize your 5 most important daily decisions. This isn't about listing every choice you make, but about recognizing which decisions have the greatest impact on your success and well-being. Start by asking yourself, which decisions, if made poorly, cause the most disruption to your goals? What choices do you consistently struggle with later in the day? Which decisions, when made well, create the most positive momentum? Once you've identified these crucial decision points, create a priority system that ensures they receive your best decision-making energy. This might mean moving important strategy sessions to the morning, pre-planning your responses to common challenges, or creating decision templates that reduce cognitive load during low-energy periods. Chapter 12. The Art of Strategic Automation. Think about your daily routine. How many times do you recreate the same schedules, rewrite the same types of emails, or recalculate the same basic figures? Each of these repetitive mental tasks chips away at your cognitive resources, leaving you with less mental energy for the decisions and actions that truly matter. This brings us to Bill Gates, who revolutionized not just technology, but the very concept of personal productivity through strategic automation. The most successful people I know automate everything that doesn't require their unique value, Gates shared during a technology summit. Discipline isn't about doing more. It's about focusing your energy where it matters most. Most people waste their best mental energy on tasks that could be systematized or automated. Gates implemented this philosophy not just in software development, but in his personal routine as well. He automated everything from his daily schedule to his wardrobe choices, creating what he called decision-free zones that preserved his mental energy for complex problem-solving and strategic thinking. I noticed early in my career that the most innovative solutions came when my mind was fresh and unburdened, Gates explained. Every routine task you can automate is like giving yourself a cognitive raise. You're investing in your ability to think clearly about what really matters. Consider the story of Diana, a content creator who transformed her business through strategic automation. Like many creative professionals, Diana started her career believing that hands-on involvement in every aspect of her work demonstrated dedication and ensured quality. She personally managed every social media post, wrote every email response, and handled every administrative task, priding herself on her attention to detail. I thought being disciplined meant doing everything myself, Diana recalls. I was working 16-hour days, but most of my energy was going to repetitive tasks that weren't actually moving my business forward. I was too exhausted to focus on the creative work that really mattered. Through the progressive automation framework, Diana began identifying tasks that consumed her mental energy without requiring her unique creative input. She discovered that nearly 60% of her daily activities followed predictable patterns that could be systematized or automated. The breakthrough came when I realized that automation wasn't about doing less. It was about creating space to do more of what mattered, she explains. I started with simple things like using templates for routine emails and scheduling tools for social media. Then I moved on to more complex automation, like creating standard operating procedures for my team and implementing project management systems that eliminated the need for constant oversight. The results were transformative. Within 6 months, Diana had automated 80% of her operational workflows, freeing up several hours each day for focused creative work. More importantly, she found herself approaching her remaining tasks with greater mental clarity and creative energy. This brings us to your automation challenge for the coming week. You'll identify 3 recurring decisions or tasks in your daily routine that consume mental energy without requiring your unique expertise. These might be administrative tasks, communication patterns, or routine decisions about things like meals or schedules. For each identified task or decision, you'll implement at least one automation system. This doesn't necessarily mean complex technology. Remember, automation can be as simple as meal prep to eliminate daily food decisions, or creating templates for common email responses. As you work through this challenge, pay attention to how much mental energy each automated task frees up. Notice how your focus and creativity improve when you're not constantly rebuilding the wheel for routine activities. Most importantly, observe how this newly available mental bandwidth allows you to bring greater discipline to the areas of your life and work that truly matter. Chapter 13. Building Accountability Systems. When we make commitments to others, different neural pathways activate compared to when we make promises to ourselves. Social commitment triggers the same brain regions associated with moral obligation and ethical behavior, creating a much stronger impetus for action than self-directed goals alone. This brings us to one of the most compelling examples of strategic accountability in action, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Despite his larger-than-life persona and seemingly boundless motivation, Johnson reveals a surprising truth about his success. People think I'm self-motivated, but I've strategically built accountability into every area of my life. It's not about having someone check on you. It's about creating systems that make success the only acceptable outcome. Johnson's approach goes far beyond simple gym buddies or workout partners. He has constructed what he calls success scaffolding, overlapping systems of accountability that make following through easier than giving up. From his social media commitments that keep millions of followers invested in his progress, to his production company that creates external deadlines for his creative projects, to his training partners who expect him at the gym at 4 a.m., every aspect of his life includes strategic accountability measures. The secret isn't finding more willpower, Johnson explains. It's creating environments and relationships where following through becomes the path of least resistance. When you have the right accountability systems in place, discipline becomes your default setting. This insight leads us to what I call the multi-level accountability framework. a comprehensive approach to building overlapping systems of support that make success virtually inevitable. Unlike traditional accountability methods that rely on single relationships or simple check-ins, this framework creates a web of commitments that provides both support and consequence. The framework operates on 3 distinct levels: personal, social, and structural accountability. Personal accountability involves creating clear metrics and tracking systems that make progress, or lack thereof, immediately visible. Social accountability leverages relationships and community expectations to drive consistent action. Structural accountability embeds success triggers into your environment and daily routines, making follow-through the natural outcome. Consider the story of Jennifer, a corporate lawyer who had dreamed of writing a novel for years, but could never seem to make consistent progress. Like many aspiring writers, she had tried various approaches: writing groups, online courses, productivity apps, but nothing seemed to stick. "I always started strong," she recalls, "but my enthusiasm would fade after a few weeks, and I'd find myself back at square one." Everything changed when Jennifer implemented the multi-level accountability framework. Instead of relying on a single accountability method, she created a 3-tier system that made writing as non-negotiable as showing up for court appearances. At the personal level, she installed a word count tracker on her computer that displayed her daily and weekly progress in bold numbers on her desktop. This constant visual reminder made it impossible to ignore days when she hadn't written. "Seeing those numbers staring at me every time I opened my laptop created a kind of internal pressure," she explains. "It was like having a silent accountability partner that never took a day off." For social accountability, Jennifer went beyond the traditional writing group model. She created what she calls her success triangle: 3 different types of accountability partners serving distinct roles. First, she found a writing partner who worked in a different genre, eliminating any competitive tension and allowing them to focus purely on process and progress. They checked in daily via text with their word counts, and weekly via video call to discuss challenges and victories. Second, she joined an online writing community where she publicly committed to posting 1 chapter every 2 weeks. "Knowing that people were waiting to read my work created a deadline that felt real," she says. "It wasn't just about letting myself down anymore. There were actual readers expecting the next installment." Finally, she recruited her sister as her consequence partner. They set up a system where Jennifer had to transfer $100 to a political cause she strongly opposed if she missed her weekly writing targets. "Having financial stakes tied to causes I disagreed with made skipping writing sessions feel physically painful," she admits. "Suddenly, following through became the easier choice." The structural level of Jennifer's accountability system involved environmental design. She converted her guest room into a dedicated writing space and programmed her smart home system to automatically dim the lights and play specific background music at her designated writing time. She also installed website blocking software that activated during her writing hours, eliminating the temptation to check email or social media. The combination of these systems created a kind of accountability ecosystem, Jennifer explains. Each level reinforced the others, making it almost impossible to fall back into old patterns of procrastination. Within 6 months of implementing this framework, Jennifer had completed the first draft of her novel, something she hadn't managed in the previous 5 years of trying. The power of Jennifer's transformation lies not in any single accountability measure, but in the synergy between multiple systems working together. When one level of accountability might have failed on its own, the others provided backup support, ensuring consistent progress even during challenging times. Chapter 14: Creating Unbreakable Routines. The science of routine building reveals something fascinating. Our bodies and brains operate on highly individualized circadian rhythms that influence everything from our peak performance times to our optimal sleep schedules. Attempting to force yourself into a routine that conflicts with your natural patterns is like trying to swim upstream. You might make progress through sheer effort, but you're fighting against your own biology. Let me tell you the story of Howard Schultz, the legendary founder of Starbucks, who built a global empire by understanding the power of personalized routines. The secret to my success at Starbucks wasn't creating the perfect routine. It was building routines perfect for me, then protecting them at all costs, Schultz reveals. Everyone told me I needed to be in the office by 6 a.m. because that's what successful CEOs do. But I discovered I did my best strategic thinking between 8:30 and 11:30 a.m. Once I designed my routine around that insight, everything changed. Schultz's approach wasn't about forcing himself into some idealized schedule. Instead, he meticulously observed his natural patterns and built systems that amplified his peak periods while supporting his natural rhythms. I stopped trying to be a morning person because someone else said I should be, he explains. Instead, I became ruthless about protecting my high-performance hours and designed everything else around them. This insight leads us to what I call the personal routine evolution method, a systematic approach to creating sustainable routines that work with your natural tendencies rather than against them. Unlike traditional routine-building advice that focuses on replicating successful people's habits, this method helps you discover and optimize your unique patterns. The method operates on 3 core principles: observation, experimentation, and iteration. First, you must become a detective of your own energy patterns, tracking when you naturally feel most focused, creative, or energetic. Then you experiment with different routine elements during these optimal windows, measuring their impact on your performance and well-being. Finally, you iterate and refine based on real-world results, not theoretical ideals. Take Anna, for example, a graphic designer who spent years beating herself up for not being able to maintain a consistent exercise routine. Like many, she tried forcing herself into early morning workouts because that's what successful people do. Every attempt ended the same way: a few days of heroic effort followed by exhaustion and abandonment. I felt like such a failure, Anna recalls. Every productivity guru preached about the power of morning workouts, but I could barely drag myself out of bed, let alone hit the gym at 5 a.m. Everything changed when Anna stopped fighting her natural rhythms and started working with them. Using the personal routine evolution method, Anna first spent 2 weeks simply observing her natural energy patterns. She discovered something surprising. While mornings were always a struggle, she consistently felt a surge of physical energy around 7 p.m., right after finishing work. This revelation challenged everything she'd read about optimal exercise timing. Instead of continuing to force morning workouts, Anna designed an evening routine that capitalized on this natural energy peak. She set up her gym clothes at her desk, creating a visual trigger for the transition from work to exercise. She found a 24-hour gym on her way home, eliminating any logistical barriers. Most importantly, she stopped feeling guilty about not being a morning exerciser. The transformation was incredible, Anna shares. Once I stopped fighting my natural rhythms, exercise stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling natural. I went from struggling to work out twice a week to consistently exercising 5 times a week, all because I worked with my body's schedule instead of against it. Anna's success came from understanding that sustainable routines aren't about willpower or discipline. They're about alignment. She created what I call a flow state routine, where each element naturally leads to the next, reducing friction and decision fatigue. Her evening routine evolved to include several complementary elements that made exercise almost inevitable. At 6:30 p.m., her computer automatically started dimming, signaling the workday's end. She'd change into the gym clothes already at her desk, eliminating the "I'll just go home first" temptation. The act of changing triggered a specific playlist she'd created for the transition to exercise mode. The music helped shift her mindset while she packed up her work materials. The gym bag was always pre-packed with fresh clothes and post-workout snacks, removing any last-minute excuses. Her route home took her right past the gym, making it actually more inconvenient to skip the workout than to do it. After exercise, she had a simple dinner routine involving pre-prepped meals, followed by light stretching and reading, activities that naturally wound her down for sleep. What amazed me wasn't just that I was finally exercising consistently, Anna explains. It was how this one aligned routine created a positive domino effect in other areas of my life. Because I was exercising in the evening, I naturally started eating better and sleeping more soundly. My morning anxiety disappeared because I wasn't starting each day feeling like a failure. Even my creativity at work improved because I wasn't exhausted from fighting my natural rhythms. The key to Anna's transformation wasn't finding more willpower or discipline. It was creating a routine that worked with her natural tendencies rather than against them. This principle applies to any routine you're trying to establish, whether it's focused on productivity, health, creativity, or personal development. This brings us to your challenge for the next week, which unfolds in two essential parts. First, you'll conduct what I call a natural rhythm audit. For the next 7 days, you'll observe and document your energy patterns without trying to change them. Pay attention to when you naturally feel most mentally alert, when physical energy peaks and valleys occur, which times of day you feel most creative, when you naturally get hungry or sleepy, which transitions in your day feel smooth versus forced. The goal isn't to judge these patterns, but to understand them. Record your observations without trying to fix or change anything. This data becomes the foundation for part 2 of the challenge. In the second phase, you'll design your minimum viable routine, the simplest possible sequence of actions that supports your most important goal while working with your natural rhythms. Notice I said minimum viable. We're not aiming for perfection or complexity. You're looking for the smallest sustainable routine that could make a meaningful difference. Using your rhythm audit as a guide, choose one key activity you want to make consistent. Then, design a simple routine around your natural peak time for that type of activity. Focus on reducing friction and creating natural flow rather than forcing specific times or sequences. Remember, the goal isn't to create an Instagram-worthy morning routine or to completely overhaul your life overnight. It's to establish one small, sustainable sequence that works with your natural patterns rather than against them. This becomes the foundation upon which you can gradually build more complex routines as your capacity and confidence grow. Chapter 15. The Power of Habit. Stacking. Marcus stared at his bathroom mirror, surrounded by the remnants of yet another failed attempt at building new habits. A meditation app gathered digital dust on his phone. A gratitude journal lay unopened on his nightstand. A workout schedule hung on his wall, unmarked for weeks. As an insurance agent, Marcus excelled at helping clients protect their futures, but he couldn't seem to secure his own personal growth. "I know exactly what I need to do," he sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "I just can't seem to make anything stick." Like many of us, Marcus had fallen into the trap of trying to force new habits into existence through sheer willpower, not realizing that the secret to lasting change was literally staring him in the face every morning as he brushed his teeth. What Marcus hadn't yet discovered, what many of us miss, is that our existing habits can serve as powerful launching pads for new behaviors. Think of your current habits as well-worn paths in your brain, neural highways that your thoughts and actions travel automatically. Instead of trying to forge entirely new paths through dense mental forest, you can build new habits by connecting them to these existing routes. The neuroscience behind this principle is fascinating. When we perform familiar actions, our brains operate in what scientists call default mode, requiring minimal conscious effort. When we connect new behaviors to these existing automatic patterns, we can essentially piggyback on the brain's established neural pathways, making the adoption of new habits significantly easier. Consider Sofia Martinez, a high school teacher who had tried countless times to establish a daily meditation practice. Like many, she started with ambitious goals, 20 minutes every morning, using expensive apps and guided programs. And like many, she found herself repeatedly failing, each attempt reinforcing her belief that she just wasn't cut out for meditation. I felt so frustrated, Sophia recalls. Everyone talked about the benefits of meditation, but I couldn't seem to make it stick. I'd set reminders, download new apps, try different techniques. Nothing worked for more than a few days. Everything changed when Sophia discovered the power of habit stacking. Instead of trying to create a meditation habit from scratch, Sophia examined her existing routines, looking for a natural anchor point. She realized that making her morning coffee was already an automatic ritual, one she performed without fail, regardless of how busy or stressed she felt. This became her foundation for change. I started incredibly small, she explains. While my coffee was brewing, just those few minutes, I would close my eyes and take 3 deep breaths. That's it. No pressure for a 20-minute session, no special cushion or app. Just 3 breaths while the coffee maker did its thing. The brilliance of Sophia's approach lay in its simplicity and natural connection. She wasn't trying to add a new task to her morning. She was enhancing something she already did automatically. The coffee maker's familiar sounds became her meditation bell. The brewing time provided a natural duration. Most importantly, the positive association with her morning coffee helped override any resistance to the new habit. Within weeks, those 3 breaths naturally expanded, Sophia shares. I found myself taking deeper breaths, staying with the practice a little longer each day. Now, 6 months later, I have a consistent 15-minute meditation practice that feels as natural as drinking my coffee. In fact, my morning doesn't feel complete without both. Sophia's success came from understanding that new habits don't need to be built from scratch. They can be grafted onto existing behaviors. She created what I call a habit bridge, where the completion of one automatic behavior naturally flows into the new desired action. Her morning sequence evolved to include several seamless connections. As she reached for the coffee beans, she automatically took her first deep breath. The sound of grinding became a trigger for closing her eyes and centering herself. While the coffee brewed, she settled into a comfortable position, letting the familiar aroma guide her deeper into mindfulness. By the time her coffee was ready, she had completed a meaningful meditation session without it ever feeling forced or separate from her morning routine. What amazed me wasn't just that I was finally meditating consistently, Sophia explains. It was how this one successful habit stack created a ripple effect throughout my day. Because I started my mornings mindfully, I found myself naturally taking breathing breaks between classes. My responses to stressful situations became more measured. Even my students noticed the difference in my teaching style. The key to Sophia's transformation wasn't finding more willpower or forcing herself to change. It was identifying a strong existing habit and carefully building upon it. This principle can be applied to any new habit you're trying to establish, whether it's exercise, reading, journaling, or any other positive behavior. This brings us to your challenge for the coming week, the habit stack experiment. This straightforward but powerful exercise will help you experience firsthand how linking new habits to existing behaviors can transform your success rate in building positive routines. First, identify one rock-solid habit you perform every day without fail. This could be brushing your teeth, making your bed, brewing coffee, or any other automatic behavior. The key is choosing something you do consistently and without conscious effort. This becomes your anchor habit. Next, select 3 tiny new habits you'd like to establish. The emphasis here is on tiny. We're talking about actions that take less than 30 seconds each. For example, if your anchor habit is brushing your teeth, your 3 new habits might be taking 3 deep breaths while the water warms up, doing 5 calf raises while brushing, saying one thing you're grateful for while rinsing. Chapter 16. Resistance-Proof Implementation. Adrian Mitchell stood in his home office, surrounded by beautifully crafted productivity planners, sophisticated project management software, and meticulously detailed goal-setting journals. As one of the top-performing real estate agents in his firm, he knew how to create systems and structures for success. Yet here he was again, staring at another abandoned system, feeling that familiar mix of frustration and bewilderment. "I don't understand," he muttered, scrolling through weeks of perfectly tracked data that suddenly stopped 3 days ago. Everything was working brilliantly. I was hitting all my targets, feeling more organized than ever, and then he trailed off, recognizing the pattern that had plagued him for years. Just as his new system started showing real results, just as success felt within reach, something would mysteriously derail his progress. Adrian's story illustrates a profound truth about human behavior that most self-help books never address. The better your systems work, the stronger your internal resistance becomes. This isn't a sign of weakness or lack of commitment. It's a natural psychological response that affects even the most successful individuals. Understanding this phenomenon is crucial for anyone seeking lasting change. Think of it like an internal thermostat set to maintain your current level of success and comfort. When you start consistently performing above this set point, your psychological immune system kicks in, generating resistance in the form of procrastination, sudden emergencies, or inexplicable lapses in your carefully crafted routines. Sarah Blakely's journey with Spanx provides a masterful example of how understanding and planning for resistance can transform your results. "Everyone talks about pushing through resistance," Blakely shared during a private interview, "but that's like trying to outmuscle a riptide. The biggest breakthrough in my business came when I stopped trying to push through resistance and started planning for it. Understanding that resistance is normal and building systems to handle it is what separated success from endless cycles of starting over." Blakely's insight came early in Spanx's development when she noticed herself creating unnecessary complications just as major opportunities arose. "I would have a huge meeting with a potential retailer coming up, and suddenly I'd find myself reorganizing my entire filing system or getting caught up in minor product details that could have waited," she revealed. "Once I recognized this pattern, I stopped beating myself up about it and started building it into my planning." Her approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of trying to eliminate resistance, which only makes it stronger, she created what she calls resistance containers. These were specific times and processes built into her schedule specifically for handling the inevitable surge of distracting activities and self-doubt that accompanied major progress. "When I knew a big opportunity was coming up, I would actually schedule time for what I called my resistance routine," she explained. "I'd block out an hour the day before to indulge in all the small tasks and worries my brain would typically use to derail me. By giving resistance its own time and space, it stopped hijacking my crucial moments." This understanding led to the development of what I call the resistance response protocol, a systematic approach to anticipating, preparing for, and overcoming the most common forms of self-sabotage. The protocol works by transforming resistance from an unexpected enemy into a predictable part of your success journey. The first step is resistance mapping, identifying your personal patterns of self-sabotage. These patterns are as unique as fingerprints, but they tend to cluster around specific triggers: approaching goals, receiving recognition, or stepping into new levels of responsibility. By documenting when and how resistance typically shows up in your life, you can begin to anticipate and plan for it rather than being blindsided. The second step involves creating specific response plans for each type of resistance you've identified. These aren't just generic motivational strategies. They're detailed, practical procedures for handling your particular forms of self-sabotage. Think of them as emergency protocols that you can activate the moment you recognize resistance arising. This brings us to your challenge for the next 5 days. The Resistance Response Challenge. This practical exercise will help you develop your own systematic approach to handling resistance and self-sabotage. Begin by identifying the 3 most common forms of resistance in your life. Look for patterns in how you typically derail your progress. Do you tend to create scheduling conflicts? Do you find yourself getting lost in perfectionist details? Do you suddenly remember urgent tasks that must be handled right away? Document these patterns with specific examples from your recent experience. Next, create a specific response plan for each form of resistance you've identified. These plans should be detailed and actionable, not vague intentions, but clear procedures you can follow even when motivation is low. For example, if your resistance often takes the form of urgent work emergencies derailing your evening routine, your response plan might include a mandatory 24-hour delay on any new urgent tasks that arise after 6 p.m., a pre-written email template for professionally postponing non-critical requests, a specific alternative time slot already designated for handling unexpected work issues. Over the next 5 days, you'll test these response plans in real-world conditions. Each evening, spend 5 minutes documenting any resistance you encountered during the day and how effectively your planned responses handled it. Pay particular attention to the specific triggers that activated your resistance, how quickly you recognized resistance when it arose, the effectiveness of your response plans, any adjustments needed to make your responses more robust. Chapter 17. Discipline Under Fire. Lucia paced her San Francisco office at 3 a.m., surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered sticky notes. As the founder of a promising AI startup, she'd built impressive systems for productivity and personal development over the past 2 years. Her morning routine was a masterpiece of efficiency. Her habit-tracking apps showed perfect streaks. Her team marveled at her consistent execution. But tonight, with a critical investor presentation looming and a major technical glitch threatening her demo, those carefully crafted systems lay in ruins. The meditation routine that usually centered her thoughts had been abandoned 3 days ago. Her meticulously planned meals had given way to whatever delivery food could arrive fastest. Even her sacred morning workout ritual had crumbled under the weight of late-night emergency coding sessions. "I don't understand," she whispered, staring at her reflection in the darkened office window. "I know exactly what I should be doing. I've built these habits over months. Why do they abandon me exactly when I need them most?" Lucia's struggle illuminates a crucial truth about discipline that most people never grasp. The systems that serve us well during normal times often collapse precisely when their benefits would be most valuable. This pattern isn't just frustrating, it's potentially devastating to long-term success. Understanding why this happens and how to prevent it marks the difference between fragile discipline and unshakable habits. The science behind this phenomenon is fascinating. Acute stress triggers a cascade of neurochemical changes that literally bypass our prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive function and disciplined decision-making. Under pressure, we default to our most deeply ingrained behaviors, not our recently acquired habits. This explains why someone like Lucia, despite months of consistent discipline, might find herself reverting to old patterns during high-stress periods. Her newer, healthier habits haven't yet been encoded deeply enough to survive the neurological storm of acute stress. It's not a failure of willpower. It's a predictable biological response that requires a specific type of preparation to overcome. Navy SEAL Commander Jocko Willink's insights on this topic are particularly relevant. During an intensive training session with corporate leaders, Willink shared a perspective that challenges conventional wisdom about discipline. "Everyone focuses on building discipline for normal conditions," he explained. "But true discipline isn't tested when things are easy. It's built by preparing for chaos before it arrives. In the SEAL teams, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." Willink's approach to stress-proof discipline was forged in environments where failure meant more than just missed deadlines or awkward presentations. "In combat, you don't have the luxury of deciding whether to maintain discipline," he noted. "Your habits either hold up under fire or they don't. We learn to build our systems with pressure in mind from the beginning." This led Willing to develop what he calls chaos protocols, specific routines and procedures designed to strengthen under pressure rather than collapse. Most people try to eliminate variables and control their environment, he explained. We do the opposite. We intentionally inject controlled chaos into our training, systematically increasing pressure until maintaining discipline becomes automatic, even under extreme conditions. Ben Morrison, a corporate attorney specializing in high-stakes mergers and acquisitions, provides a compelling example of how this system can transform deeply ingrained stress responses. For years, Ben had struggled with stress eating during intense case preparations, falling into a cycle of late-night snacking and sugar crashes that compromised both his health and his performance. I had tried everything, Ben recalls. Meal prep, accountability partners, even locking the office snack cabinet. But the moment a major case landed on my desk, all those strategies would evaporate. I'd find myself at midnight, surrounded by empty candy wrappers, wondering how I'd lost control again. The turning point came when Ben stopped treating his stress eating as a bad habit to break and started viewing it as a pressure response to rewire. Using the pressure-proof performance system, he began systematically exposing himself to increasing levels of work stress while practicing his desired eating habits. He started small, intentionally creating minor time pressure during routine tasks while maintaining his planned meal schedule. He would artificially tighten deadlines for standard contracts, practicing his new eating habits under slight strain. As these situations became manageable, he gradually increased the pressure, taking on pro bono cases with tight turnarounds, specifically to pressure test his nutrition habits. The key was that I wasn't just trying to maintain discipline under pressure, Ben explains. I was actually using the pressure to strengthen my new habits. Each successful repetition under stress made the habit more automatic, more deeply encoded. Ben developed specific protocols for different levels of work intensity. For moderate stress periods, he had a precise meal timing and composition plan. For high-pressure situations, he created what he called his crisis nutrition protocol, a specific set of meals and snacks that required zero decisions and could be executed automatically even during the most intense case preparations. The results were transformative. During a recent billion-dollar merger negotiation, the type of case that would have previously triggered days of stress eating, Ben maintained his nutrition plan flawlessly. The pressure actually felt familiar, he notes. Because I had systematically trained my habits under similar conditions, maintaining discipline didn't require any extra willpower. It was just what I did automatically. Ben's experience highlights a crucial principle. Pressure-proof discipline isn't about being perfect under ideal conditions. It's about building habits that perform reliably under real-world stress. This requires a fundamentally different approach to habit formation, one that intentionally incorporates pressure from the beginning. The pressure-proof performance system operates on three key principles. Progressive pressure exposure. Instead of trying to eliminate stress, systematically introduce controlled pressure while practicing your desired habits. Start with mild pressure situations and gradually increase intensity as your habits strengthen. Environmental simulation. Create training scenarios that mirror your most challenging real-world situations. If you know you'll need to maintain discipline during early morning meetings, practice your habits during deliberately scheduled early sessions. Automatic response protocols. Develop specific, detailed procedures for different levels of pressure. These should require minimal decision-making and be practiced until they become automatic responses to stress triggers. This approach fundamentally changes how habits respond to pressure. Instead of treating stress as a threat to your discipline, it becomes a strengthening mechanism, much like how physical stress in proper doses builds stronger muscles. But this system isn't just for high-powered executives or extreme situations. This brings us to your challenge for the week, the stress simulation exercise. This carefully structured practice will help you begin building pressure-proof habits in a controlled, progressive manner. Choose one critical habit you want to strengthen, something important that tends to falter under pressure. This could be your morning routine, your exercise habit, your focused work periods, or any other disciplined practice that matters to you. Over the next 5 days, you'll intentionally create mild stress situations while practicing this habit. The key is to start with manageable pressure and gradually increase intensity. For example, if you're working on maintaining a focused work routine, you might: Day 1. Set an artificial deadline, 15 minutes shorter than normal for a routine task. Day 2. Work in a slightly distracting environment while maintaining focus. Day 3. Add an unexpected, urgent task to your workflow. Day 4. Combine multiple mild stressors while maintaining your routine. Day 5. Create a more challenging simulation that mirrors real pressure situations you face. During each session, pay careful attention to how your habit responds to different types of pressure, which aspects of your routine are most vulnerable to stress, what specific adjustments help you maintain discipline under pressure. Document your observations and use them to refine your approach. Remember, the goal isn't perfect performance. It's systematic strengthening of your habits under controlled stress conditions. Chapter 18. The Focus Formula. Emma Martinez stared at her computer screen, 12 browser tabs competing for her attention, while her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. As a rising digital marketing consultant, she prided herself on her ability to juggle multiple client projects simultaneously. Her perfectly organized project management software showed an impressive array of tasks completed each day. Her time-tracking apps revealed consistent 60-hour work weeks. By all traditional metrics, she was a model of productivity and discipline. Yet something felt off. Despite her rigorous work ethic and meticulously tracked schedule, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was spinning her wheels. "I'm doing everything right," she confided to her business coach. "I've built solid systems. I stick to my schedule. I track every minute. But at the end of each week, I feel like I've been busy without being truly productive. It's like I'm disciplined about everything except what actually matters." Emma's struggle illuminates a crucial paradox of modern productivity. Disciplined action without focused direction often leads to sophisticated forms of procrastination. Many high achievers mistake activity for achievement, building impressive systems around tasks that don't move the needle on their most important goals. This pattern is particularly dangerous because it can mask itself as productivity, leading to what I call disciplined distraction, the art of being incredibly organized about the wrong things. The neuroscience behind this phenomenon reveals why traditional approaches to productivity often fail to deliver meaningful results. The human brain can only sustain genuine focused attention for limited periods. When we attempt to maintain disciplined attention across too many domains simultaneously, we don't actually multitask. We rapid switch, depleting our cognitive resources while reducing our effectiveness at every task. This insight helps explain why someone like Emma, despite her impressive work ethic, might feel stuck in a cycle of busy work. Her brain wasn't designed to maintain focused discipline across multiple simultaneous projects. Each context switch, each new browser tab, each notification check was invisibly eroding her capacity for deep, meaningful work. Will Smith's approach to this challenge offers a compelling alternative. During an intensive acting workshop at the Actors Studio, Smith shared a perspective that challenges conventional productivity wisdom. "Early in my career, I thought success was about doing everything with discipline," he explained. "I would pride myself on how many different projects I could juggle, how many balls I could keep in the air. But I learned that discipline without direction is just busy work. The secret isn't doing more things with discipline, it's doing fewer things with complete focus." Smith's revelation came after a particularly challenging period, where he found himself spread thin across multiple film projects, music recordings, and business ventures. Despite working harder than ever, his performance in each area was suffering. I realized I was being disciplined about being busy, he recalled. But I wasn't being disciplined about being effective. Everything changed when I started treating my focus like my most valuable resource. This led Smith to develop what he calls his one thing at a time rule, a strict protocol for protecting his attention during critical creative periods. When preparing for a role, he would systematically eliminate all other professional commitments, creating what he calls focus tunnels, extended periods where his entire disciplined effort could be directed at a single objective. People think this approach is a luxury that only established actors can afford, Smith noted. But I actually built my career on this principle. Even when I had less resources and more pressure to take every opportunity, I learned that focused discipline on fewer things produced better results than scattered discipline across many things. The science supports Smith's approach. Individuals who protect extended periods of focused work not only produce higher quality output, but also experience less stress and greater satisfaction with their work. This research forms the foundation of what I call the Strategic Focus Framework, a comprehensive system for identifying and protecting your most important work. The framework operates on a crucial insight. Not all disciplined action is equally valuable. By carefully analyzing your actual results, not just your activity, you can identify the specific types of focused work that create disproportionate impact. Once identified, these high-leverage activities deserve extraordinary protection, what I call focus fortification. David, a copywriter struggling to build his business, provides a compelling example of how this framework can transform both productivity and results. Despite working long hours and maintaining strict discipline with his schedule, David found himself stuck at a plateau, unable to increase his income or impact. I was doing everything the productivity experts recommended, David recalls. I had my morning routine down to the minute. I used every time management app available. I even had different types of background music for different types of tasks. But I was so focused on being disciplined about my systems that I lost sight of what actually moved the needle in my business. The turning point came when David applied the strategic focus framework to analyze his work patterns. He discovered that despite his careful time management, he was spending less than 2 hours per day on what he called money work, the deep, focused writing that actually generated revenue for his business. The rest of his time was consumed by what he termed productivity theater, tasks that felt important but contributed little to his bottom line. Using the framework, David redesigned his entire approach to discipline. Instead of trying to be disciplined about everything, he created what he calls focus fortifications around his most valuable work periods. He identified his peak creative hours, early morning in his case, and built elaborate protective systems around this time. I treated my focus time like a fortress, David explains. I created specific protocols for defending it against both external and internal distractions. My phone goes into airplane mode. My internet access is restricted to essential research sites. I even set up a separate physical workspace that I use only for deep writing. No email, no social media, no administrative tasks allowed in this space. The results were dramatic. Within 3 months of implementing these changes, David doubled his writing output while actually reducing his total working hours. More importantly, his income increased by 70% because he was focusing his best energy on his highest value work. The biggest surprise was how much easier it felt, David notes. When I stopped trying to be disciplined about everything and focused my discipline on protecting what really mattered, the whole experience of work changed. I wasn't fighting against my attention anymore. I was working with it. David's experience highlights a crucial principle. True productivity isn't about maintaining discipline across all activities. It's about applying focused discipline to your most important work. This requires a fundamental shift in how you think about both discipline and attention. Chapter 19: Energy Management Mastery. Raj Patel sat at his desk late Thursday afternoon, staring blankly at an important brief that needed his attention. Despite his meticulously crafted schedule and disciplined approach to work, he felt completely drained. The same systems and routines that had him operating like a well-oiled machine earlier in the week now seemed impossibly demanding. As a senior partner at his law firm, Raj had mastered the art of time management. His calendar was a testament to efficiency, with every hour optimized for maximum productivity. Yet here he was, struggling to maintain focus on a case that would have energized him just days earlier. "I don't understand what's wrong with me," Raj confided to his executive coach. "I've built solid systems. I stick to my schedule religiously. But by Thursday, everything feels 10 times harder than it should. It's like I'm trying to run a marathon with weights strapped to my legs." Raj's experience illuminates a critical blind spot in traditional approaches to discipline: the assumption that willpower and good systems alone are enough to sustain peak performance. Like many high achievers, Raj had mastered the art of time management, while completely overlooking the science of energy management. This oversight is particularly dangerous because it often affects the most disciplined individuals, those who have the drive and systems to push through fatigue until they hit a wall. The science behind this phenomenon reveals why even the most carefully constructed productivity systems often break down over time. Research from the Human Performance Institute shows that our capacity for sustained discipline isn't primarily limited by time. It's limited by energy. This insight fundamentally challenges the conventional wisdom about productivity and performance. Think of your discipline like a high-performance sports car. Traditional productivity advice focuses entirely on the driver, willpower, and the roadmap, time management. But without proper attention to fuel levels and engine maintenance, energy management, even the most skilled driver following the perfect route will eventually break down. Research reveals that as our energy reserves diminish, our capacity for disciplined action decreases exponentially, not linearly. This means that pushing through fatigue isn't just inefficient, it's actively counterproductive, creating a downward spiral where each disciplined action becomes progressively more costly in terms of energy expenditure. Roger Federer's approach to this challenge offers invaluable insights for anyone seeking to maintain consistent discipline. During a masterclass at the Tennis Academy of Excellence, Federer shared a perspective that challenges conventional wisdom about peak performance. "Early in my career, I was obsessed with training harder than everyone else," he explained. "I would pride myself on pushing through fatigue, on being more disciplined about practice than any of my competitors. But I was missing something crucial: the discipline of recovery." Federer's revelation came after a particularly grueling season where he found his performance deteriorating, despite maintaining his rigorous training schedule. "Everyone focuses on training harder," he noted, "but I discovered that mastering my energy through strategic recovery was what allowed me to maintain peak performance year after year. It wasn't about being disciplined enough to push through fatigue. It was about being disciplined enough to respect my body's need for recovery." This led Federer to develop what he calls his energy-first principle, a comprehensive approach to managing his physical, mental, and emotional resources. "People think rest is the opposite of discipline," he observed. "But I learned that strategic recovery is actually the highest form of discipline. It requires the courage to step back when everyone else is pushing forward." The science supports Federer's approach. Recent studies from the Sports Science Institute of South Africa demonstrate that athletes who implement structured recovery protocols not only perform better, but also maintain their peak performance levels for longer periods. This research forms the foundation of what I call the energy optimization protocol, a systematic approach to managing your energy for sustained discipline. The protocol operates on a crucial insight. Energy, unlike time, is not a linear resource. It oscillates in natural cycles throughout the day and week, influenced by everything from sleep patterns to nutritional timing to environmental factors. By understanding and working with these natural rhythms, rather than against them, you can maintain higher levels of discipline with less effort. Hannah, a successful startup founder, provides a compelling example of how this protocol can transform both productivity and sustainability. Despite her impressive work ethic and carefully structured schedule, Hannah found herself burning out every few months, forced to take extended breaks to recover. "I was doing everything by the book," Hannah recalls. "I had my morning routine, my productivity systems, my accountability measures, but I was treating my energy like an infinite resource. I thought being disciplined meant pushing through no matter what. It took a complete breakdown for me to realize I was approaching it all wrong." The turning point came when Hannah began mapping her energy patterns using the energy optimization protocol. She discovered that her natural energy cycles didn't match her imposed schedule at all. She was scheduling her most demanding strategic work for late afternoons, exactly when her mental energy typically dipped. "It was like trying to swim upstream," Hannah explains. "I had built my entire schedule around external expectations, rather than my natural rhythms. I was using pure willpower to compensate for working against my body's natural cycles." Using the protocol, Hannah completely redesigned her approach to work. Instead of maintaining a rigid schedule based on conventional business hours, she created what she calls energy-aligned blocks, scheduling different types of tasks to match her natural energy patterns. "I discovered that my creative energy peaks in the early morning," she shares. "My analytical thinking is sharpest mid-morning to early afternoon. And my social energy, perfect for meetings and team interactions, actually peaks in the late afternoon when my deep focus abilities are declining." This insight led Hannah to restructure her entire workday. She now reserves her early morning hours exclusively for creative strategy work, handles complex analytical tasks before lunch, and schedules all her meetings and team interactions for later in the day. Most importantly, she built in what she calls recovery windows, scheduled periods for recharging her energy between intense work blocks. "The biggest challenge was giving myself permission to rest," Hannah admits. "I had to learn that taking strategic breaks wasn't being lazy. It was being smart about managing my energy. Now I actually get more done while working fewer hours, simply because I'm working with my natural rhythms instead of fighting against them." The results were transformative. Not only did Hannah's productivity increase, but she also found herself maintaining consistent high performance without the periodic crashes that had previously plagued her. Her team noticed the difference too. She was more present, more creative, and more effective in her leadership role. "The most surprising thing was how this affected my discipline in other areas of life," Hannah notes. "When I stopped depleting my energy fighting against my natural rhythms at work, I suddenly had more capacity for maintaining discipline in my exercise routine, my relationships, and my personal growth practices." Hannah's experience highlights a crucial principle. Sustainable discipline isn't about maintaining constant output. It's about orchestrating your energy for optimal performance over time. This requires a fundamental shift in how you think about both discipline and productivity. The energy optimization protocol operates on 3 core principles: understanding your unique energy patterns and natural rhythms, aligning your most important tasks with your peak energy periods, building strategic recovery into your schedule before you need it. This approach fundamentally changes how you relate to discipline and performance. Instead of trying to maintain constant high output through sheer willpower, you learn to work with your natural energy cycles, maximizing effectiveness while minimizing energy waste. Let's talk about Michael Torres, a freelance creative director who used these principles to transform his work patterns. Previously, he prided himself on being able to work long hours on client projects, often pushing through fatigue to meet deadlines. While this earned him a reputation for reliability, he found his creativity suffering and his ideas becoming increasingly derivative. Using the energy optimization protocol, Michael began tracking his energy patterns throughout the day. He discovered that his most innovative ideas consistently came during his first work session of the day, provided he had gotten adequate rest the night before. This led him to create what he calls his creative prime time, a sacred 2-hour block every morning reserved exclusively for his most challenging creative work. "I used to think being disciplined meant being able to do creative work anytime," Michael shares. "Now I understand that true discipline means respecting the natural rhythms of my creative energy and organizing my schedule accordingly." This brings us to your challenge for the week: the energy mapping exercise. This structured practice will help you begin understanding and optimizing your own energy patterns. Chapter 20: Social Engineering for Success. Victor stood in front of his bathroom mirror on a Sunday morning, wincing at his reflection. Despite maintaining a strict no-alcohol policy during the work week and following a disciplined fitness routine, he had once again broken his habits during a night out with his college friends. This wasn't an isolated incident. Every time he met his old social circle, his carefully constructed system seemed to evaporate. As a senior project manager at a leading tech firm, Victor had no trouble maintaining iron discipline at work. Yet something about these social situations made his resolve crumble like a house of cards. "I don't get it," Victor confided to his personal trainer. "I can turn down drinks with clients, stick to my diet during stressful projects, and maintain perfect workout consistency Monday through Friday. But put me in a room with my old friends, and suddenly I'm acting like I'm still in college. It's like I become a completely different person." Victor's experience illuminates a crucial blind spot in traditional approaches to discipline: the overwhelming influence of our social environment on our behavior. While most discipline-building strategies focus on individual willpower and personal systems, they often overlook the powerful force of social contagion, the scientifically proven phenomenon where we automatically adopt the behaviors, attitudes, and even the goals of those around us. Our habits and behaviors are not simply influenced by our social circle, they're practically predetermined by it. A study, spanning over 3 decades and examining more than 12,000 individuals, found that a person's chances of engaging in any particular behavior increase by up to 300% if that behavior is common among their close social contacts. This brings us to a fundamental truth about human behavior. We are not just individuals making independent choices. We are nodes in vast social networks, constantly being shaped by the expectations, habits, and attitudes of those around us. Understanding this principle transforms how we approach discipline from a solo endeavor into a social engineering project. Oprah Winfrey's journey provides a masterclass in leveraging this principle. During a private leadership summit, she shared an insight that challenges conventional wisdom about success. "People talk about my drive, my work ethic, my standards of excellence," she explained. "But what they don't see is that I didn't just build a media empire. I strategically built relationships that made excellence the only acceptable option." Winfrey revealed how, early in her career, she made a conscious decision to reshape her social circle. "I realized that I was the average of the 5 people I spent the most time with," she noted. "And if I wanted to become extraordinary, I needed to surround myself with people who would make ordinary feel uncomfortable." This wasn't about abandoning old friends or being elitist. It was about understanding that our social environment shapes our standards, our aspirations, and ultimately our actions. "Your life is a direct reflection of the expectations of your peer group," Winfrey explained. "When you surround yourself with people who are already where you want to be, what seems impossible to others becomes your normal." First, understanding that your behavior is the average of your social influences, not just your conscious choices. Second, recognizing that social pressure can be strategically harnessed as a positive force rather than an obstacle. And third, accepting that actively engineering your social circle isn't selfish. It's necessary for achieving your highest potential. Mia's story perfectly illustrates how this method can transform not just individual habits, but entire life trajectories. As a fledgling entrepreneur trying to launch her sustainable fashion brand, Mia found herself constantly battling the well-meaning but limiting influences of her existing social circle. Everyone around me had a traditional 9-to-5 mentality, Mia recalls. Whenever I talked about my business dreams, they'd respond with concerns about stability or suggest I keep it as a side hobby. I realized that their fear was becoming my fear. Their limitations were becoming my limitations. The turning point came when Mia began systematically rebuilding her social circle using the social circle optimization method. She started attending entrepreneur meetups, joined a high-level mastermind group, and began volunteering at startup events. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like I was pretending to be something I wasn't, she admits. But gradually, I noticed something changing. The conversations I was having, the problems I was solving, the goals I was setting, they all started to shift. Within 6 months, Mia's social circle had transformed. Instead of spending weekends with friends who questioned her dreams, she was surrounding herself with people who challenged her to think bigger. The most amazing thing wasn't just the practical advice or connections I gained, she shares. It was how my own sense of what was possible expanded. Goals that seemed outrageous before started to feel normal, even conservative. The results spoke for themselves. Mia's business grew from a small Etsy shop to a 6-figure enterprise within 18 months. Looking back, I realized that the single biggest factor in my success wasn't strategy or skills. It was strategically engineering my social environment to support my aspirations rather than suppress them. This brings us to a crucial point about social engineering. It's not about abandoning existing relationships, but about consciously designing your social exposure to support your goals. Sometimes this means creating boundaries around negative influences, rather than eliminating them entirely. Notice how James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, frames this concept. Your habits are modern-day solutions to ancient desires. But here's the key. Those desires are heavily influenced by your social circle. Change your social environment, and you change what your brain considers normal. The social circle optimization method provides a framework for making these changes systematically rather than haphazardly. It begins with a clear-eyed assessment of your current social influences and their impact on your goals and habits. This isn't about judging people as good or bad influences, but about understanding how different relationships affect your behavior and aspirations. The method then guides you through the process of strategically expanding your social circle to include more people who embody the habits and achievements you aspire to. This might mean joining professional organizations, attending specific events, or seeking out mentorship relationships. Finally, the method helps you develop specific strategies for managing existing relationships that may unintentionally sabotage your goals. This could involve setting clear boundaries, redirecting social activities toward more supportive environments, or having honest conversations about your aspirations and needs. The power of this approach lies in its ability to transform discipline from a constant battle against social pressure into a natural outcome of your environment. When excellence becomes the norm in your social circle, maintaining high standards requires less willpower because you're swimming with the current rather than against it. This brings us to your challenge for the week, the relationship audit. This exercise will help you begin the process of optimizing your social environment for success. Take out your journal and evaluate the 5 people you spend the most time with. For each relationship, keep this in mind. How does this person's presence affect your habits and behaviors? What standards or expectations does this relationship reinforce? How do you feel about your goals and aspirations after spending time with this person? Based on this assessment, develop specific strategies for either upgrading these influences or creating appropriate boundaries. Remember, This isn't about judgment or abandonment. It's about consciously designing your social environment to support your highest aspirations. Chapter 21. Emotional Discipline. Jordan Matthews sat at his piano, fingers hovering over the keys, paralyzed by the weight of emotions he couldn't quite name. As one of Los Angeles's most promising session musicians, he had no trouble maintaining rigorous practice schedules when he felt inspired. But on days like this, when a heavy cloud of melancholy settled over him, his carefully crafted routines crumbled. The half-finished compositions scattered across his studio stood as silent witnesses to this pattern. Bursts of productivity, followed by emotional derailments that could last for weeks. "I know I should just push through it," Jordan confided to his mentor during a particularly difficult period. "But it feels impossible to create when I'm not in the right headspace. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just not cut out for this. Maybe real artists know how to channel their emotions better." Jordan's struggle illuminates a critical misconception about discipline, the belief that emotional states are forces we must passively endure rather than skills we can actively master. This misunderstanding leads countless talented individuals to build their disciplines on the unstable foundation of emotional chance, hoping each day brings the right feelings for productivity. Lady Gaga's journey provides a masterful example of this principle in action. During an intimate interview at her Malibu home, she shared insights that challenge conventional wisdom about creativity and emotional states. "Early in my career, I bought into the myth that artists need to be at the mercy of their emotions to create authentic work," she revealed. "But that approach nearly destroyed me. I realized that true artistry isn't about waiting for the right feelings. It's about building systems to channel every emotion into productive action." Gaga went on to describe how she developed specific protocols for different emotional states. "People think I'm just naturally productive or disciplined, but what they don't see is the systematic way I've learned to use every feeling, positive or negative, as fuel for creation. When I'm feeling down, I don't wait to feel better. I have specific songwriting exercises designed for those moments. When I'm anxious, I have a different protocol. When I'm overwhelmed with joy, there's another system. Every emotion becomes a tool rather than an obstacle." This insight forms the foundation of what I call the emotional resilience framework, a comprehensive system for transforming unpredictable emotional states from discipline destroyers into discipline drivers. The framework operates on three core principles. First, emotions are data, not directives. They provide valuable information about our internal state, but shouldn't dictate our actions. Second, every emotional state can be paired with specific practiced responses that maintain productive movement. And third, emotional mastery is a skill that can be systematically developed through intentional practice. Claire Anderson's story perfectly illustrates how this framework can transform not just individual moments of emotional challenge, but entire patterns of productivity. As the founder of a rapidly growing digital marketing agency, Claire found her business performance swinging wildly based on her emotional state. "I could close 3 major clients when I was feeling confident," Claire recalls. "But one difficult phone call could send me into an emotional spiral where I'd barely maintain existing accounts, let alone pursue new opportunities. I kept telling myself this was just part of being a passionate entrepreneur, but deep down, I knew my lack of emotional discipline was holding me back." The turning point came when Claire began implementing the emotional resilience framework. She started by mapping her most common emotional triggers and their typical impact on her business activities. Then, she developed specific response protocols for each emotional state. "The breakthrough moment wasn't when I stopped feeling negative emotions," Claire explains. "It was when I stopped seeing them as productivity killers and started treating them as signals to engage specific protocols. When rejection from a potential client triggered self-doubt, instead of spiraling into procrastination, I had a specific sequence of actions to execute. When imposter syndrome hit during important presentations, I had practice responses ready to deploy. The results were transformative. Within 6 months, Claire's business showed a 40% increase in revenue, not because she felt better more often, but because she maintained consistent action regardless of her emotional state. The most powerful realization was that I didn't need to feel confident to act confidently, or feel motivated to take motivated action. I just needed to follow my emotional response protocols. The science behind this approach is fascinating. Research from the Department of Cognitive Psychology at Stanford University shows that pre-committed responses to emotional states can bypass the brain's natural tendency to let feelings dictate actions. By having specific protocols in place, we create neural shortcuts that maintain productive behavior even when our emotional brain is pushing for retreat. This brings us to the practical application of the emotional resilience framework. The first step is emotional mapping, identifying your most common emotional states and their typical impact on your disciplined actions. This isn't about judging emotions as good or bad, but about understanding their current influence on your behavior. Next comes protocol design, developing specific, actionable responses for each emotional state. These protocols should be simple enough to execute even when emotions are running high, but substantial enough to maintain meaningful progress toward your goals. Finally, the framework emphasizes consistent practice, regularly implementing these protocols until they become your default response to emotional triggers. This is where true emotional discipline is built, not in the absence of challenging feelings, but in the consistent execution of productive responses to them. Pay attention to how Daniel Goleman, author of Emotional Intelligence, frames this concept. The key to emotional discipline isn't controlling what you feel, but controlling what you do with what you feel. Every emotion can become a catalyst for productive action if you have the right systems in place. This brings us to your 5-day emotional response training challenge. This exercise will help you begin building your own emotional discipline system. Here's your task. First, identify your 3 most disruptive emotional states, the feelings that most commonly derail your productive habits. For each of these states, design a specific action protocol, a sequence of steps you'll take when that emotion arises. These protocols should be simple enough to remember and execute even when you're emotionally charged. Over the next 5 days, practice implementing these protocols whenever these emotions arise. Keep a small journal nearby to document both your successes and areas for refinement. The goal isn't to eliminate these emotions, but to build reliable response systems that maintain your discipline, regardless of how you feel. Remember, emotional discipline isn't about becoming less emotional. It's about becoming more systematically responsive to your emotions. As Lady Gaga noted, every feeling can fuel your progress if you build the right channels for it to flow through. Your challenge begins now. Take out your journal and start mapping those emotional states that most commonly challenge your discipline. For each one, we'll develop a specific response protocol that transforms that emotion from an obstacle into an ally. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress and practice. Chapter 22: Breaking Through Plateaus. Aisha Rahman stood before the mirror in her gym's training room, frustration etched across her face. For 3 years, she'd maintained an unwavering commitment to her training schedule, arriving at 5 a.m. sharp, following her program to the letter, tracking every rep and set. Her discipline had transformed her from a casual gym-goer into a competitive powerlifter, earning her several regional titles. But for the past 4 months, her numbers hadn't budged. Despite her perfect attendance and meticulous attention to form, her bench press remained stubbornly fixed at 185 pounds. "I don't understand," she confided to her training partner. "I'm doing everything right. I haven't missed a session. My nutrition is perfect. My sleep is dialed in. Why isn't anything changing?" Like many disciplined individuals, Aisha had fallen into the common trap of mistaking consistency for progress, not realizing that even the most well-designed routines eventually reach their natural limits. This phenomenon isn't unique to athletics. Whether you're building a business, developing a skill, or pursuing any meaningful goal, you'll inevitably encounter plateaus. Those frustrating periods where your most disciplined efforts seem to yield diminishing returns. These plateaus aren't signs of failure. They're natural pause points in your growth journey that require a different type of discipline to overcome. The science of adaptation explains why even our most effective habits eventually stop producing results. Research from the Department of Performance Psychology at the University of Danton has shown that our bodies and minds have a remarkable ability to normalize any consistent stimulus, no matter how initially challenging it might have been. This adaptation mechanism, which helped our ancestors survive by becoming more efficient at recurring tasks, can become a barrier to continued growth in our pursuit of excellence. Think of it like listening to a constant background noise. Eventually, your brain filters it out. Similarly, when you repeat the same actions, even highly disciplined ones, your system becomes increasingly efficient at performing them, requiring less effort and producing less adaptation. This is why the same workout routine that transformed your fitness in the first 6 months might yield virtually no results a year later. Michael Jordan's approach to breaking through plateaus offers profound insights into this challenge. During a private training session I observed at his basketball camp, Jordan shared a perspective that challenges conventional wisdom about discipline and progress. Everyone hits walls, he explained, demonstrating a variation of his famous fadeaway jumper. The difference between good and great isn't trying harder at what stopped working. It's systematically identifying and breaking through your current limitations. Jordan went on to describe how he revolutionized his training approach after the Detroit Pistons' Jordan Rules defense repeatedly stopped him in the playoffs. I could have just practiced my existing moves more intensely, with more discipline, he recalled. Instead, I systematically analyzed where I was truly stuck and developed entirely new patterns of play. The breakthrough came not from working harder, but from working differently. This insight forms the foundation of what I call the Plateau Breakthrough Protocol, a systematic approach to identifying and transcending your current limitations. The protocol operates on 3 key principles. First, plateaus are information, not obstacles. They tell you precisely where your current systems have reached their limits. Second, breaking through requires strategic disruption, not just increased effort. And third, new levels of performance demand new patterns of behavior. Eric's story perfectly illustrates how this protocol can transform a seemingly insurmountable plateau into a launching pad for new progress. As a software developer who had successfully lost 60 pounds through disciplined diet and exercise, Eric found himself stuck at 195 pounds for 6 frustrating months. Despite maintaining his meal prep routine and regular workout schedule, the scale wouldn't budge. I was doing everything right, Eric remembered, or at least everything that had been right up until that point. I kept thinking if I just stayed disciplined enough, eventually things would start moving again. But they didn't. The turning point came when Eric implemented the Plateau Breakthrough Protocol. Instead of doubling down on his existing habits, he conducted what I call a limitation audit, a systematic analysis of where his current systems were actually maxing out. This process revealed something surprising. His meticulously planned routine, which had served him so well initially, was now holding him back. I discovered that my body had completely adapted to my carefully scheduled meals and workouts, Eric explained. The very consistency I was so proud of had become my biggest limitation. My system needed strategic chaos, not more discipline. Using the protocol, Eric implemented calculated disruptions to his routine. He introduced carb cycling instead of maintaining the same daily caloric intake. He varied his workout times rather than always exercising at 6 a.m. He experimented with different movement patterns, rather than following the same lifting program. The results were remarkable. Within 8 weeks, Eric broke through his plateau, dropping another 15 pounds and reaching his goal weight of 180. More importantly, he developed a deeper understanding of how to evolve his habits as his goals and circumstances changed. The science behind this approach is fascinating. Research from the Institute of Performance Psychology shows that strategic variability, intentionally introducing controlled chaos into your routines, can reactivate adaptation pathways that have gone dormant through excessive consistency. It's not about abandoning discipline, but about applying it more intelligently. Think of it like learning a language. Initially, mastering basic grammar and vocabulary through consistent practice yields rapid progress. But to achieve fluency, you need to expose yourself to different contexts, accents, and usage patterns. The same principle applies to any skill or goal. What got you here won't get you there. This brings us to the practical application of the Plateau Breakthrough Protocol. The first step is conducting a thorough limitation audit. This isn't just about identifying where you're stuck, but understanding exactly why your current systems have stopped producing results. Are you hitting physical limitations, mental barriers, environmental constraints? Next comes strategic disruption design. This involves creating calculated variations in your routine that challenge your system in new ways while maintaining your core discipline. These disruptions should be significant enough to stimulate adaptation, but controlled enough to prevent complete derailment. Finally, the protocol emphasizes systematic evaluation and adjustment. Each disruption serves as an experiment, providing data about what types of changes produce the best results for your specific situation. Your challenge for the next 3 days is to begin implementing this protocol in your own life. Start by identifying one significant plateau, an area where your disciplined efforts have stopped yielding the results they once did. Using the limitation audit worksheet I've provided, systematically analyze where your current systems are maxing out. Then, design and implement one strategic disruption to your routine. This isn't about random change. It's about intentionally challenging your established patterns in ways that force new adaptation. Document your observations and results, paying particular attention to how your system responds to the disruption. Remember, breaking through plateaus isn't about working harder at what's no longer working. It's about working differently in ways that stimulate new growth. As Michael Jordan noted, the ceiling of your current system becomes the floor of your next level of performance. Chapter 23. Crisis-Proof Habits. Lauren Mitchell stood in the hospital corridor, her phone buzzing with work notifications while her mother lay in the ICU following a sudden stroke. For the past 3 years, Lauren had built an impressive morning routine that included meditation, exercise, and focused work blocks. Her discipline had earned her a reputation as the most reliable project manager at her consulting firm. But now, facing this family emergency, her carefully constructed habits were crumbling like a house of cards. The meditation app on her phone showed a 248-day streak, now broken. Her workout journal lay untouched in her bag. The carefully planned project timelines on her laptop seemed almost laughably irrelevant in the face of real crisis. As she watched doctors hurry past and listened to the steady beep of monitoring equipment, Lauren realized a painful truth. Her disciplined systems had been built for ideal conditions, not real life. "I thought I was disciplined," she confided to her sister during a quiet moment in the hospital cafeteria. But the moment things got truly difficult, everything fell apart. What good is a system that only works when life is easy? This scenario plays out countless times across different lives and circumstances. Whether it's a family emergency, financial crisis, health challenge, or professional setback, most people discover that their carefully crafted habits aren't built to withstand genuine chaos. The discipline that seems unshakable during normal times often proves surprisingly fragile when real pressure hits. The reason for this common pattern lies in how we typically approach habit building. Traditional advice focuses on optimizing for ideal conditions, creating the perfect morning routine, designing the optimal workspace, establishing the ideal schedule. While these strategies can be powerful under normal circumstances, they often fail spectacularly when life throws a serious curveball. Research from the Crisis Management Institute reveals that during periods of acute stress, our cognitive capacity can decrease by up to 50%. This means that complex routines requiring multiple steps or specific conditions become nearly impossible to maintain. Yet paradoxically, these are exactly the times when strong habits become most crucial for maintaining stability and forward momentum. Tony Robbins shared a powerful insight about this phenomenon during a private coaching session I observed. The ultimate measure of your habits isn't how they perform when life is easy, he explained while working with a group of executives, but how they adapt when everything falls apart. Most people build beautiful habits that work perfectly in a vacuum, but life isn't lived in a vacuum. It's lived in the chaos of reality. Robbins went on to describe how he discovered this principle early in his career when a sudden loss of his voice, his primary professional tool, forced him to completely reimagine his approach to impact and delivery. I could have seen it as a crisis that destroyed my system, he recalled. Instead, it taught me to build crisis-proof versions of everything I did. Now, I have scaled-down versions of every important habit that can survive almost any circumstance. This insight forms the foundation of what I call the minimum viable discipline framework, a systematic approach to creating crisis-resistant versions of your most important habits. The framework operates on 3 core principles. First, identify the absolute essential core of each habit, the minimum action that still delivers some benefit. Second, create modified versions that can be performed under different types of pressure, time constraints, energy depletion, emotional stress. Third, practice these scaled-down versions regularly, even during good times, so they're familiar when you need them. Marcus's story perfectly illustrates how this framework can preserve crucial habits even during extreme circumstances. As the founder of a tech startup, Marcus had built strong routines around exercise, meditation, and strategic planning. These habits had helped him grow his company from a garage operation to a 50-person team. But when a major client suddenly pulled out, triggering a cash flow crisis that threatened bankruptcy, his carefully structured days dissolved into a chaos of emergency meetings and sleepless nights. Initially, I completely abandoned all my habits, Marcus remembered. I thought I didn't have time for anything except crisis management. But after 2 weeks of this, I was making worse decisions and feeling physically sick. I realized that dropping my core habits wasn't helping me solve the crisis. It was making me less capable of handling it. Using the minimum viable discipline framework, Marcus created crisis-modified versions of his key habits. His usual hour-long morning workout became a 5-minute series of bodyweight exercises he could do anywhere. His 20-minute meditation practice transformed into 3 deep breaths before every meeting. His detailed weekly planning ritual simplified to asking one question each morning. What's the single most important thing I must accomplish today? These weren't the full versions of my habits, Marcus explained, but they maintained the essential core. They kept me anchored when everything else was spinning out of control. And honestly, having these stripped-down versions helped me stay more consistent with my full routines once the crisis passed. The science behind this approach is fascinating. Research from the Behavioral Adaptation Laboratory shows that during periods of acute stress, maintaining even a minimal version of a positive habit can provide significant psychological benefits. It's not just about the physical or practical benefits of the habit itself. It's about maintaining a sense of control and continuity when everything else feels chaotic. Think of it like keeping a small flame alive during a storm. You might not be able to maintain a bonfire, but even a small protected flame can provide light and warmth until conditions improve. Similarly, crisis-proof habits aren't about maintaining perfect performance. They're about preserving the essential core of your most important practices until you can return to full strength. The framework begins with what I call habit core extraction, identifying the absolute essential element of each practice that provides value. For example, if your habit is reading for an hour each evening, the core might be engaging with ideas that expand my thinking. This core can be maintained even when a full hour of reading isn't possible, perhaps through listening to an audiobook during a commute or reading a single powerful paragraph mindfully. Next comes pressure point modification, creating specific scaled-down versions for different types of challenges. Time pressure might require an ultra-short version. Energy depletion might need a less demanding variation. Emotional stress might call for a more supportive approach. Finally, the framework emphasizes regular practice of these modified versions, even when they're not strictly necessary. This builds familiarity and prevents the modified versions from feeling like failure modes when you need to use them. Your challenge for the next week is to begin implementing this framework in your own life. Start by identifying your 3 most important habits, the practices that most directly support your well-being and effectiveness. Using the worksheet provided, create specific crisis versions for each habit, designed to handle different types of pressure. A time-constrained version that takes less than 5 minutes. A low-energy version that requires minimal physical or mental effort. An emotionally supportive version for periods of high stress. Then, choose one modified version and practice it this week, even if you don't strictly need to. Pay attention to how it feels, what benefits it maintains, and how you might refine it further. Remember, the goal isn't to create inferior versions of your habits, but to build resilient variations that can survive real-world chaos. As Tony Robbins noted, crisis doesn't build character, it reveals it. The same is true for your habits. Real discipline isn't about being perfect when everything's easy. It's about maintaining your core practices, even when everything is falling apart. Lauren discovered this truth in her own journey. As her mother's recovery progressed, she gradually rebuilt her habits, but not in their original form. She created a flexible meditation practice that could be done in hospital waiting rooms, a bodyweight exercise routine that needed no equipment, and a simplified planning system that maintained productivity without requiring perfect conditions. I used to think discipline meant doing everything perfectly, she reflected 6 months later. Now I understand that real discipline is about maintaining your essential practices, even if they don't look perfect. Sometimes a few mindful breaths are worth more than a missed hour of meditation. Chapter 24. The Compound Effect. Jessica stared at her reflection in the gym mirror, fighting back tears of frustration. For 3 months, she had maintained perfect attendance at 6 a.m. workouts, followed her nutrition plan without a single cheat meal, and consistently performed her physical therapy exercises. Yet the scale barely showed a 10-pound difference, and her chronic shoulder pain still lingered. "What's the point?" she whispered to herself, reaching for her phone to cancel her gym membership. "All this discipline, and I'm barely seeing any results." Like Jessica, countless individuals abandon their disciplined pursuits just before the miracle of compounding kicks in. They maintain consistent action for weeks or months, but because they don't see dramatic immediate results, they conclude their efforts aren't working. This fundamental misunderstanding of how progress actually accumulates leads many to quit just before their breakthrough moment. The mathematics of compound growth reveals a fascinating truth. Progress rarely follows a linear path. Instead, it tends to follow what mathematicians call an exponential curve. In the beginning, changes appear almost imperceptible, but over time, as small gains build upon previous gains, the rate of progress begins to accelerate dramatically. Warren Buffett, who built his fortune through understanding compound interest, shares a profound insight about this principle. Most people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and drastically underestimate what they can achieve in a decade of consistent action. This observation doesn't just apply to financial investments. It's equally true for any area where consistent disciplines accumulate over time. If you improve at something by just 1% each day, the mathematics of compounding means you'll be 37 times better at it after 1 year. Not 365% better, which would be the linear calculation, but 3,700% better. This is because each day's 1% improvement builds upon all previous improvements, creating an exponential growth curve that most people fail to anticipate. The challenge lies in our brain's natural tendency toward linear thinking. We expect that if we put in X amount of effort, we should see X amount of results, distributed evenly over time. But compound growth doesn't work that way. It often follows what I call the hockey stick pattern, a long period of seemingly minimal progress, followed by a sudden, dramatic upturn. Understanding this pattern is crucial because it explains why so many people abandon their disciplines just before their breakthrough moment. They interpret the initial flat part of the curve as evidence that their efforts aren't working, rather than recognizing it as the necessary foundation for exponential growth. This brings us to the Compound Achievement Matrix, a practical system for tracking and optimizing the compounding effect of daily disciplines over time. This framework helps you maintain perspective during the crucial early stages when progress seems minimal, while simultaneously setting up the conditions for explosive growth later. The matrix operates on 3 key principles. First, it tracks leading indicators rather than lagging results. Instead of focusing solely on end outcomes, like weight loss or revenue, it measures the consistent performance of input activities that you know will compound over time. This helps maintain motivation during periods when visible results are minimal. Second, it implements what I call compound stacking, strategically choosing disciplines that multiply each other's effects. For example, combining meditation, which improves focus, with study, which requires focus, creates a compound effect greater than either practice alone. Third, it includes regular compound reviews, scheduled moments to zoom out and examine your progress over longer time frames, helping you recognize patterns of accumulation that might be invisible on a day-to-day basis. Ricardo Martinez's story perfectly illustrates how understanding and leveraging the compound effect can transform modest disciplines into extraordinary results. 5 years ago, Ricardo worked as a full-time software developer while running a small web design business on the side. His initial progress was painfully slow. For the first year, he maintained the discipline of spending just 30 minutes each morning working on his business before his day job. Those early months were so discouraging, Ricardo remembers. I was getting up at 5 a.m. every day, but my side business revenue barely increased. I made just $126 more in month 3 than I did in month 1. Several times I almost convinced myself it wasn't worth the effort. But Ricardo had studied the mathematics of compound growth and understood something crucial. Small, consistent actions don't just add up, they multiply. Each client interaction, each completed project, each learned lesson built upon all previous experiences. He wasn't just accumulating hours, he was accumulating expertise, relationships, and reputation. Using the Compound Achievement Matrix, Ricardo tracked not just his revenue, but also his leading indicators: number of client conversations, proposals sent, and new skills learned. This helped him maintain motivation during periods when financial results were minimal. The matrix helped me see that even though my revenue wasn't growing quickly, my capabilities and network were expanding exponentially, Ricardo explains. Each small interaction or lesson learned wasn't just a single step forward. It was building a foundation for future multiplication. By month 6, Ricardo started noticing interesting patterns. Clients began referring other clients. His increased expertise led to higher value projects. The systems he'd built started saving him time, allowing him to take on more work without increasing his hours. Today, Ricardo's side business generates over $2.1 million annually, employs 11 people, and continues to grow through the power of compound effects. Looking back, those early morning 30-minute sessions were actually the most valuable part of my journey, he reflects. They weren't just about the work I did. They were about building the discipline of consistent action that allowed everything else to compound. The science behind compound effects extends beyond business and finance. Research from the Journal of Applied Psychology shows that learning follows a similar pattern. Initial progress in any new skill often appears slow because your brain is building fundamental neural pathways. But once these pathways are established, they facilitate accelerated learning in related areas, creating a compound effect of skill acquisition. This principle appears in physical development as well. Exercise physiologists have documented how consistent training creates compounding adaptations in the body. Initial progress might seem minimal as the body builds basic strength and endurance. But these foundational changes eventually enable breakthrough performances that would have been impossible without the accumulated effect of consistent practice. Understanding these patterns helps explain why Jessica's story, which opened our chapter, isn't actually a tale of failure, but rather a perfect example of someone on the verge of breakthrough. Her 3 months of consistent discipline had been quietly building compound effects that weren't yet visible in the mirror or on the scale. The slight weight loss she noticed? That was just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of positive changes happening beneath the surface. Her cardiovascular system was becoming more efficient. Her muscles were developing better nerve recruitment patterns. Her body's inflammatory responses were gradually normalizing. All these changes were building upon each other, setting the stage for accelerated progress. Had Jessica understood the compound achievement matrix, she would have tracked these leading indicators rather than focusing solely on scale weight. She would have noticed how her energy levels were improving, how her sleep quality was better, how her strength in key exercises was gradually increasing. Most importantly, she would have recognized that she wasn't just accumulating workouts. She was building the compound effect of consistent health disciplines. This brings us to your final challenge in our journey together: finding a compound partner and creating a 6-month compound effect plan. This partner should be someone else who is reading this book or who is actively engaged in personal development. Together, you'll select one key discipline to maintain consistently over the next 6 months, understanding that the real magic happens through accumulated effect rather than immediate results. Conclusion. When you first clicked on this audiobook, you might have expected another collection of rigid rules and restrictive practices. Perhaps you braced yourself for yet another voice telling you to try harder or show more willpower. Instead, you've discovered something far more powerful: the path to true freedom through strategic discipline. Throughout our journey together, we've systematically dismantled the myths that have held you back. You've learned that discipline isn't about punishment or deprivation. It's about liberation. Every principle, framework, and strategy we've explored has served one ultimate purpose: to help you build systems that make success inevitable, not exhausting. You've built systems that transcend motivation, understanding that waiting to feel like it is a recipe for inconsistency. The implementation immediacy method and progressive automation framework have shown you how to create structures that produce results regardless of emotional state. You've learned to make success the path of least resistance. As you move forward, remember that the compound effect of disciplined action is working in your favor. Just as Warren Buffett's wealth grew exponentially through consistent investment, your dedication to these principles will yield increasingly powerful results over time. The systems you've built aren't just supporting today's goals, they're creating the foundation for tomorrow's breakthroughs. Your journey from here is about more than maintaining what you've built. It's about expanding the possibilities of what you can achieve. The discipline you've developed isn't a rigid set of rules, but a flexible framework that adapts and grows with you. It's your platform for continued exploration, innovation, and achievement. I challenge you now to become living proof that extraordinary discipline leads to extraordinary results. Your transformation isn't just about personal achievement. It's about inspiring others by demonstrating what's possible when you understand and apply these principles consistently. Remember, true freedom doesn't come from avoiding discipline, but from mastering it. The systems you've built, the habits you've developed, the mindset you've cultivated, these are your tools for creating whatever future you envision. Your journey of transformation isn't ending. In many ways, it's just beginning. The discipline you've developed has become your new normal. It's no longer something you do. It's who you are. And that, ultimately, is the greatest freedom of all. Thank you for listening to my audiobook. You've taken the first step. Now go write your story, one action at a time. You've got this.